What actually makes someone a great concert pianist? You know, it's just hours and hours of practice, or is there something innate?
That's the big question, isn't it? And we're kicking off a new series exploring exactly that, using this fantastic book, Great Contemporary Pianists Speak for Themselves, by Elyse Mach.
Right. Why did Elyse Mach put this book together? The preface, it gives a pretty clear reason.
It really does. She points out how often famous people, especially artists, get misquoted or just give like superficial answers in quick interviews. Sound bites.
Yeah, you see that all the time.
Mm-hmm. But this book, different story. These pianists, they apparently gave hours of their time. The whole point was to let them speak freely, minimal interruption from the interviewer.
So you get the real deal, not some edited version.
Precisely.
That's powerful. And who is this actually aimed at? Is it just for, like, other top pianists?
Not at all. The preface makes a point of saying it's for a really wide audience. Aspiring musicians, obviously pianists, but also teachers.
Okay.
Parents, parents of talented kids. Serious piano students, too. And honestly, anyone who just loves classical music and is curious about, well, what goes into that level of artistry.
So questions about starting young, teaching, the realities of a concert career.
Yeah, all that stuff. And just satisfying that curiosity about these, let's face it, pretty extraordinary people. It feels like the book speaks directly to you if you have those interests.
It's like getting advice straight from the greats.
Yeah.
Welcome to Piano Night Studio, a podcast where music, piano, and literature come together. Here, we explore the stories behind the notes, the lives of composers and performers, and the books that have shaped the musical world. Whether you're a pianist, a passionate listener, or simply someone who finds beauty in the sound of a single note, this space is for you. In each episode, we go through ideas, emotions, and the timeless connection between music and words. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so moving from the why and who to the what. So Georg Solti wrote the introduction, and he starts by saying defining a concert pianist is tricky.
Yeah, he uses that great phrase like trying to capture the wind.
Yeah, I like that. Elusive.
Very. But even though it's hard to define, Solti does pinpoint 3 things he thinks are absolutely essential. Non-negotiable, really.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first one is talent. And
Yeah.
he's really firm on this. It has to be innate, something you're just born with.
So not something you can just learn through practice alone?
Nope. He says it can't be taught. He mentions people like Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, giants, He calls it this inherent magic. Or even a demon?
A demon? That's quite a word. Like a force.
Yeah, but a benign devil, he says. Something that kind of possesses the artist, but also mesmerizes the audience. It's not just skill. It's this compelling force. It's there in different amounts, but all the great ones have it.
Wow. Okay, so innate talent, this demon. But that can't be the whole picture, surely.
No, definitely not. Solti's second ingredient is determination. Or you could call it stubbornness, maybe industriousness.
Right, the grit.
Exactly. That absolute resolve to succeed, to push past criticism, hurdles, setbacks. He actually believes true talent will find a way out, partly because of this sheer drive.
So the gift needs the will. Okay, what's number 3?
Discipline. Simple as that, but profound. Solti calls it the musician's constant companion. It grows out of that daily grind, the practice.
Practice. And that leads to that famous quote, doesn't it? The Paderewski one?
That's the one. If I don't practice for 1 day, I know it. If I don't practice for 2 days, the critics know it. And if I don't practice for 3 days, the audience knows it.
Oof. Yeah. That just says it all about the relentless commitment required. It makes you
Yeah.
realize these pianists, they didn't just get lucky.
Not at all. The book really shows it's this combination, that spark, that demon of talent, fused with just incredible hard work, discipline, and, well, self-belief, too.
And getting their insights on this directly.
Yeah.
That's what makes this book and this series so interesting. You're hearing it from them.
Absolutely. It gives you, the listener, this unfiltered access to how they think about this blend of, the given gift and the relentless effort.
It does leave you thinking, though, if talent is that unimpeachable demon, how much does the discipline, the sheer will, actually shape its power? How much can you forge through that daily work?
That's a great question to ponder. And look, this was just scratching the surface, the ideas that kick off the book. There are so many deep personal interviews in there with legendary pianists sharing their own journeys.
Right, this is really just the beginning.
Focusing now on the really legendary Claudio Arrau, based on this interview you've brought.
That's right. And jumping into his world, the description of his place in Douglaston, it really sets the scene, doesn't it? His music room, it seems, was maybe less about the piano and more about these walls just lined with books, art, artifacts.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that, because that detail feels really significant. It suggests, right away, a life that's rich in so much more than just music itself. It kind of introduces his whole philosophy.
It really does. He apparently felt he was like born playing the piano, almost like it was just part of his arms.
Yeah.
But, and this is key, he insisted natural gifts alone, they're not enough. You need a teacher.
And his only teacher was Martin Krauss. That name connects him straight back to Liszt, and through Liszt to Czerny and Beethoven.
And Krauss's core lesson, it seems, was that technical brilliance, virtuosity, well, that's just the foundation. It's the tool you use to get to the real point. Understanding and interpreting the music's actual meaning. Being just a piano player, however good, wasn't the goal.
Right, which flows perfectly into his whole idea of the total artist. He really pushed for developing this complete general culture. He was passionate about that. Theater, opera, art, psychology. He said these things contribute enormously.
And he clearly lived it. Constantly learning, buying art, surrounding himself with, well, beauty, nature, knowledge, things that inspired him. He talks about reading a new book on Mozart, focusing on the psychology, or watching a really great Madame Butterfly and focusing on the acting, the direction, not just the singing.
So the reason behind all this was, well, to really get music, you have to embrace everything. The total universe, as he put it.
Exactly. He thought specializing too much just makes you narrow. An incomplete artist.
And he took that same idea into studying music itself, didn't he? Like, don't just focus on Beethoven or just Chopin.
Right. He believed knowing a wider range helps you understand every composer better. And to learn a specific piece, you need to dig into that composer's entire body of work. Look for connections and analogies and other pieces that might, shed light on tricky passages.
That's a huge commitment. He mentioned specific techniques, too, from Krauss, like Liszt's trills, not just being fast notes, but having expressive meaning, changing speed and volume.
Yes, and things like scales needing fluidity, arms like snakes, loose wrists, or how to play broken chords cleanly, like in Liszt's Harmonies du Soir. And even pedaling, pushing it down before the chord hits to get a ridge sound, not a hard one.
But always, technique was just the means to interpretation.
Always. Interpretation for him started with absolute loyalty to what the composer wrote, using early editions, manuscripts if possible. But then, on that faithful base, the artist builds their own vision, a vision that matures over time, but crucially, one that doesn't, destroy the piece's integrity.
Which explains why he felt young artists couldn't really tackle late Beethoven or Schubert authentically. He called it impossible pretension. They hadn't lived enough with the music, or just lived enough, maybe.
It's a strong stance. He was also, interestingly, quite engaged with modern music for his time. Stockhausen, Boulez, Elliott Carter, Ives, Schoenberg.
Oh, really? Like Carter's Piano Concerto?
Yes, and he mentioned Zimmermann's opera. D.S. Soldaten saw it multiple times, apparently fascinated by the musical imagination. He saw music as constantly evolving, never into it.
Shifting to the concert world. He saw changes there, too, right? With audiences.
Yeah, he noted audiences weren't just the elite anymore. They came from everywhere, were often more knowledgeable, maybe because of recordings, and less reserved. He felt concerts could become almost a religious experience.
But he worried about the business side, pushing young prize winners too fast.
Definitely. He felt they needed time to mature, to grow into the repertoire, not just be thrown into constant touring. He pointed to Daniel Barenboim, never won a big prize, but became this extraordinary, deep musician. For Arrau playing a concert was always an event, never routine, always nerves.
He also shared something quite personal about seeing a psychiatrist when he was young, like 18 or 19.
Yes, for an emotional block. He found it incredibly helpful, crucial even for his development and peace of mind. He actually recommended therapy for performers.
And what about critics? How did he view them?
Limited influence, basically. He advised being careful with negative reviews. They can cause depression, but maybe consider them briefly, then just let them go. He noted how inconsistent they could be anyway.
Wrapping up his perspective, he seemed very grounded in the present, preferred living now in an era-questioning tradition.
Very much so. No belief in an afterlife. Life is here and now. And his legacy, what he hoped to leave. It was about building your own artistic structure, your own vision, but always based on truth and being faithful to the composer's text.
So taking all this in, Arrau really presents the artist as, well, as a deeply integrated person.
Yeah.
Technical skill is vital, sure, but it's just the beginning, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's the whole person drawing on culture, psychology, life experience that ultimately brings the music alive with real depth.
Which does make you wonder if that kind of deep engagement and time for maturation is what creates true artistry, according to Arrau. What does that imply about the pressures and paths facing many young musicians today? Something to think about. Vladimir Ashkenazy. What's the first impression you get of him?
Well, what's really striking is this contrast. He paints himself as quiet, unassuming, almost shy. He even uses the phrase pretty dull,
which is hard to square with the composers he plays, right? The drama, the passion.
Precisely. But then he immediately pivots to his complete devotion to music. That quietness is channeled into intense work.
Yeah, the work ethic comes across so strongly. He mentions practicing, 5 to 7 hours daily? When he could, anyway.
Though he's realistic about tour schedules making that tricky. But the key thing for him, it seems, wasn't relying on, say, winning competitions or waiting to be discovered.
Right. He saw those as outcomes, not the starting point. It was about the grind, the sheer hard work, attitude, and persistence.
Exactly. It's the foundation.
So where did this start for him? The interview mentions his father was a pop accompanist, but it was his mother's idea for him to try piano at 6.
Yes. And that fed directly into that very intense Russian training system. 10 years at a special music school before the conservatory.
Which he started around 17 or 18.
Right. And by that point, the source says, fundamentals were considered done. You were expected to know your weaknesses and just tackle the big, difficult pieces.
His early teacher, Anita Sembatian, seems crucial here. She focused heavily on the basic scales, fingerwork, building blocks.
Absolutely essential groundwork. And then winning the Chopin Prize in Warsaw at 18.
A real turning point. He says himself it solidified things, made the work feel even more compelling.
Deepened his commitment, yeah. But what's fascinating is, despite that success within the system, he's actually quite critical of it later in the interview.
How so? What was his main issue?
He saw it as very state-controlled. The goal, in his view, was producing winners for international competitions. For national prestige.
He calls them musical sportsmen, is that right?
Yeah, suggesting it's more about technical display for glory than maybe deeper artistic exploration or a unique personal voice. He even links the system's intense discipline to the despotic nature of the regime, as he puts it.
That's quite a statement, connecting the politics and the arts so directly. He also touches on this idea of a Russian technique minimal movement.
He mentions that perception, though apparently people had differing views on his own movement. But he pushes back against easy labels.
He doesn't like categorizing pianists like Horowitz, Richter, Gilels under one banner.
No, he sees them as distinct individuals, first and foremost, not just products of one system or technique.
And speaking of individuals, his comments on his own mentor, Neuhaus, are really interesting. Not exactly praising his technical teacher.
Right. He calls him an eagle without wings, physically limited with a really tough repertoire, but
brilliant in other ways.
Absolutely. Artistic temperament, personality, inspiration, apparently amazing with smaller pieces, conveying their essence, mentorship beyond just the notes.
Which ties into his whole philosophy of music, doesn't it? He seems to feel its purpose is much higher than just entertainment or excitement.
Yeah, it's something almost ineffable, something he tries to communicate just by playing. And for him, that kind of deep artistry needed freedom.
Real freedom, spontaneity, trying things out. He explicitly says that's why he left Russia. Peace of mind, controlling his own path.
That was paramount. And it led to quite a few moves, London first, then Iceland for quiet.
Though that got tough with travel as concerts increased.
Right. So eventually Lucerne in Switzerland became home base, much more accessible. And his schedule sounds intense, like 130 concerts a year.
Wow. But he stresses trying to balance that with family, his wife, and 5 kids, taking them on tour sometimes, prioritizing summers.
That freedom also shaped his music choices, didn't it? Selecting his own programs.
Yes, sticking to a classical core, Russian composers, but adding Bartók, doing the complete Beethoven sonatas, playing what resonated with him. And he's quite clear he's not drawn to avant-garde music.
And his learning process sounds unique, too. Lots of mental work before playing.
Understanding the structure away from the keyboard first. He respects composer notations, but admits he might deviate if he suspects a misprint or feels something isn't quite precise.
Interesting. And practice isn't just for technique, it's his way of handling nerves before performing.
It makes sense, grounding yourself in the work. Looking back, he also mentions wanting to meet composers like Beethoven, Rachmaninoff.
Not just about the music, but their personalities. Trying to get past the legends to the actual people.
And looking ahead, at the time of this interview, he seemed pretty pessimistic about playing in the Soviet Union again, didn't he? Doubted fundamental change would happen there.
Yeah, a rather somber note there. But overall, this chapter paints such a rich portrait. The discipline, the critique of the system, the absolute value placed on freedom, both personal and artistic. We're picking up with the chapter on Alfred Brendel.
Right. And the source really sets a scene, doesn't it? Chicago, hot day, meeting him after hours of practice.
Yeah, you get this image, kind of lanky, maybe tired at first, but then just lights up talking music.
Exactly. These bits we're looking at, they really open a window into his way of thinking. Very unique.
So one thing that jumps out is his career path. He didn't decide on piano professionally until, what, 17 or 18?
Yeah, relatively late. Before that, he was seriously into composing, painting, poetry. Lots of possibilities he saw.
Which maybe explains his view of the piano itself, that it needs to transcend itself.
Yeah, that's a core idea for him. He felt, unlike a voice or a violin, the piano's sound isn't inherently, sensuous.
So it needs the pianist to make it something else.
Precisely. It waits to play roles, he said. It has to sound like an orchestra, or maybe most importantly like a voice singing, not just piano keys being hit.
And this connects to how he learned too. Not a child prodigy, no regular teacher after 16.
Right, mostly self-taught in the practical sense after that. Just a few master classes. He mentions Edwin Fischer's.
So he had to figure things out himself.
Yeah. He called it slow but thorough and very personal. That really defined his approach.
That self-reliance seems key. How did it affect how he approached, say, a big masterpiece?
Well, he insisted on treating each one as totally unique.
Yeah, approach it fresh first. Analysis comes later, after you've gotten acquainted with it. And try to keep that freshness, even when you know it inside out.
Interesting balance. Which brings us to feeling versus thinking. He values intellect, obviously, but quotes himself saying feeling is alpha and omega.
It's not either for him. The thinking part, the structure of a Beethoven sonata, say, that is emotional. It's tied up with feeling.
Like that interplay he mentioned between chaos and order, referencing Novalis.
Exactly. Art as this ordering principle against life's messiness. So how does this philosophy play out in, actual practice?
Well, he believed the music tells you what technique you need, and he had this specific idea about practicing fast bits.
Right. Don't just slow them down.
Yeah, he felt playing them slowly could actually teach you the wrong fingering for when it's up to speed. He liked Storman's method, break it down, but practice the chunks at tempo.
Makes sense. What about memory? Any major issues?
He said, not really. Things tended to stick. Slips happen more in recitals, sure. He mentioned Fischer, Cortot, Schnabel. They all had lapses sometimes.
But they managed. They wouldn't just slow down to play it safe.
Exactly. Musically, they kept going. And interestingly, for influences, he listened to older pianists, but
Learned.
he said he often learned more from conductors and singers. Wished he could hear Beethoven. Liszt thought Liszt would be technically amazing today, and Mozart play.
He seemed to always be learning, right?
Constant discovery. He didn't think it ever ended with Beethoven. And critics. He'd listen for how things came across.
Like, what did they actually hear?
Right. But ultimately, his own judgment was paramount.
He described his early career as being an outsider, taking longer.
Mm-hmm. Working things out himself. But he saw advantages, more time for repertoire, watching concert life, no pressure of instant fame, no single recipe for success, he insisted.
And working with conductors. Any friction there?
Oh, sure. Clashes can happen, technique, age, personality, compromise is needed. He mentioned tricky spots, tempo-wise, in Beethoven's First, or the Brahms D minor.
But knowing the whole score helps.
Definitely. Conductors respect that. He mentioned liking working with Abadeau, Barenboim, Levine, Zinman.
And teaching. Was he keen on that?
Not regular teaching, really. More master classes focused only on the piece. He'd give a diagnosis, but students had to find their own way.
He even did that project where students heard different opinions, right?
Yeah, let them decide.
Wow.
He also planned to write more. His book was a collection, fragments of ideas, articles on composers, and that piece, Coping with Pianos.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Not something you hear about often.
Right. Looking ahead, his main goal was just keep playing, keep learning. Re-recorded Beethoven, planned more Haydn, Schumann, Smetana, Busoni.
But his repertoire had limits.
Yeah, generally stopped around Schoenberg. Berg didn't like what he called reactionary music. Said Schoenberg and company were the new music of our grandfathers by then.
And performance life itself?
He acknowledged it's often hard work, health, weather, the hall, the specific piano, plus internal stuff. But no superstitions.
Just practical routine, nap, wop up?
Pretty much. Limited practice hours, too, maybe 5. Valued time away from the piano for thinking, studying. But he enjoyed the travel, felt privileged, found pleasure in it. John Browning.
John Browning. And this interview catches him in a pretty specific setting, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. He's in a coffee shop in Evanston, Illinois. He was there teaching a master class at Northwestern, but also juggling, like a heavy concert schedule.
You can almost picture it, the coffee, maybe some cigarette smoke back then.
Wow.
Busy guy.
Definitely. And the whole point here for us is to kind of pull out his core insights straight from him. What did he think about piano technique, about teaching, repertoire?
And, his view on where classical music was heading overall. So where do we start? What jumps out first?
Well, his view on students is pretty blunt right off the bat. He felt they came in obsessed with technique. How fast can I play?
The finger-wiggling obsession.
Exactly. He said his first job was getting rid of that technique-first delusion. He felt they just brought fingers to the piano.
So not enough music, just mechanics.
Pretty much. He wanted them thinking in orchestral terms, making the piano sound like different instruments, giving it color, depth.
Okay, so technique serves the sound, not the other way around.
Precisely. He points to Horowitz, said his genius wasn't just the velocity, but that he could produce like 10 different sounds, 10 instruments from one piano. For Browning, technique is sound production, ultimately.
That's a really important distinction. And didn't he have some thoughts on American training specifically? Sort of critical?
Oh, definitely. He called American technical training spotty at best. He thought a big reason was that students just started way too late compared to, say, the Soviet Union back then.
Interesting. He contrasted it with older standards.
Yeah, he mentioned stories from the Levines about St. Petersburg or Moscow conservatories decades earlier, suggesting the basic playing level was just stronger foundationally than what he saw, even at Juilliard sometimes.
He used an analogy, right? Something about sports.
Figure skating. You need that early physical coordination training for sports, right? But he felt we often delay serious artistic training in the U.S.
But he wasn't about pushing one specific technical method on people, was he?
Not really, no. For himself, he basically felt if he was going to be good, he'd figured it out. He believed he had a natural technique, a natural sense of sound, voicing, pedaling.
So his teaching focused elsewhere.
More on cultivating what he called sound and voice consciousness, making students aware of the sound they were producing. He knew it might take years to really sink in.
Okay, and the pedal. Always tricky for students.
Yeah.
What was his angle there?
He really disliked seeing young pianists use it as a crutch, like just flooring an accelerator and holding it down. He said it just destroys legato, muddies everything.
So less is more, or just smarter use?
Smarter use. Again, he brings up Horowitz, saying he didn't need the pedal to connect notes, but used it for subtle color. Sometimes played whole pages without it. Browning's advice was, if you do use a lot of pedal, you have to make the musical lines incredibly clear, otherwise it just becomes a roar.
Right, definition gets lost. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Repertoire. What did he see as essential?
Bach. He called Bach the Bible for discipline, counterpoint especially. Though, interestingly, he felt some Bach, like the Concerti or Goldberg variations, often sounded better on a harpsichord in actual performance.
Stylistic opinions, too. Mozart, Chopin.
Oh, yeah. He suggested loosening up Mozart's slow movements a bit, but actually tightening Chopin's rubatos, not letting them get too floppy.
And contemporary music. Was he open to new stuff?
He definitely saw Barber's Sonata and Concerto and Prokofiev as standard modern repertoire, but he admitted he was pretty wary of the far-out avant-garde. Said he and Samuel Barber would often leave those concerts just wishing for a good tune.
Relatable for some, I guess.
Yeah.
He felt a lot of it wasn't written well for the piano.
Yeah, not idiomatically for the piano as a sort of romantic singing instrument. He valued learning a lot of music, though.
How so?
He gave huge credit to his teacher, Lee Pattison, for just pushing him relentlessly to memorize tons of repertoire by his early 20s. Memorization, he said, is just out-and-out hard work, no magic trick.
Simple as that. And what about the actual life? The concert grind?
He didn't mince words, called it slave labor, just the constant cycle. Practice, rest, eat, dress, play, travel, repeat. He said it becomes routine, even boring.
Boring. Wow.
Yeah, and he felt artists have to consciously push themselves to change and grow just so that boredom doesn't start showing in their playing. Keep it fresh internally.
That makes sense. And this leads to his thoughts on the future of classical music, which he apparently discussed with Leonard Bernstein.
Right, and this is where it gets pretty provocative.
Yes.
He suggested, maybe reluctantly, that music as a creative art form might have sort of reached an end.
An end? What did he mean by that?
He saw artists increasingly functioning as curators, preserving and playing the great music of the past, rather than creating truly new works that enter the permanent repertoire in the same way older masterpieces did.
Artists as museum curators. That's quite an image.
It is. And he tied this to the economics, too. Rising deficits for orchestras and opera houses, funding sources may be shrinking, and just the basic question of whether society can keep supporting it all, since it depends entirely on audiences showing up. He even worried about the state of concert halls in cities.
So, wrapping up Browning's perspective, it's a picture of a really demanding career, a deep struggle to teach true musicality, that sound consciousness beyond just notes, and maybe a sobering view on where things were headed.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that constant need for internal growth, the difficulty of teaching something so intangible, and the often unglamorous reality behind the performance.
One incredible figure from the book, Alicia de Larrocha. Honestly, her path was, Not what you'd expect.
Not at all. She starts by saying, "It seems to me that I was born listening to music." And you can believe it.
Absolutely. Music was everywhere. Her mother, her aunt, they'd studied with Granados. Imagine growing up with that.
But it wasn't just background. For her, it was like essential.
Totally. She said at age 1, she preferred the piano to dolls. Can you picture that?
Wow.
But when they locked it, she had a nasty temper. Screaming, hitting her head on the floor, apparently until it bled.
Goodness.
Yeah. Her aunt finally promised lessons when she turned 2, just to, calm her down.
That intensity is something else. And then the story at the Marshall Academy.
Oh, that's a classic. 2 years old, she marches in, grabs Mr. Marshall's trouser leg and says she wants to play.
And he tells her she's too young.
Right. And she felt like everyone was against her. But instead of backing down, it just fueled her, made her more determined.
She had this theory about Spanish people loving opposition, didn't she?
She did. She wondered if it was an inborn trait. Like, tell them yes, and they might just say no to be contrary. It's quite a thought.
So that fire pushed her to learn by ear, improvise.
Yeah.
Until Marshall finally gave in.
Exactly. Though she said his method wasn't exactly steadfast.
Yeah.
But the crucial thing is she never aimed for a career back then.
No.
No. Music just was her life. She wanted to be part of her physiology, like her heart or lungs. That deep.
So if a career wasn't the goal, how did she end up performing worldwide?
Well, initially, performances were just for experience, not about showing off. Then the Spanish Revolution hit.
Right, a 3-year gap.
3 years, where she basically only played and wrote for herself. Complete withdrawal, musically speaking.
And after that?
Things were very uncertain. Catch as catch you can, she called it. Some invitations abroad, here and there, but no real plan, no certainty about her reputation building.
And her parents weren't pushing her.
Not at all. Very hands-off. They saw her sensitivity, sure, but they let her figure things out. Her mother actually worried she spent too much time at the piano.
Wanted her to get fresh air.
Exactly. So the big international break, that came much later.
1965, right. After that U.S. debut in 54 didn't really lead anywhere.
Yeah, the 54 debut with the L.A. Phil was kind of, led to a lot of nothing, as she put it. Then Herbert Breslin heard her records.
Ah, the manager.
Right, he started writing to her. But her husband was suspicious of his letterhead, called him the man with the trumpet.
Huh, so they ignored him.
The first couple of letters, yeah. But the third one, that offered 5 concerts with the New York Philharmonic, that was different.
Okay, that gets your attention.
Definitely. Despite her local manager being skeptical, she went for it. And that, she said, was the real start, like a mountain falling on her. Things really took off then.
Now let's talk about her views on the music world itself. She didn't mince words about competition.
Oh, absolutely not. She thought the whole system was wrong, completely wrong. An artificial and mechanical Olympic, she called it.
Turning pianists into mere machines.
Exactly. And she felt similarly about publicity doesn't make you a good musician. She acknowledged chance, needing someone behind the artist.
But her own success
Came from the force of love for music, she insisted. Something she simply had to do. It wasn't about chasing a career path laid out by others.
That's a really powerful distinction. It explains her selfish pianist comment, too.
Right. Playing primarily for herself, not worrying about legacy. Just hoping people enjoyed it and didn't find her too nasty, personally.
She was quite open about her moods affecting her playing sometimes, too.
Yeah, making the piano sound harsh. But getting lost in the music, becoming completely involved, that was the only way out of it for her.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Her actual method, her technique.
Super practical. First step, always study the score, carefully. Then identify the tricky passages.
And the fingering.
Crucial. She focused intensely on practical fingering, called it the base of security. That's why she wasn't big on practicing away from the piano.
You need to feel it on the keys.
Precisely. Does it actually work? Slow practice was also huge for her.
Like a slow motion movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To see all the details, check accuracy, phrasing, solidify the memory. She wasn't a believer in just visualizing it or practicing silently. Found it too unnatural.
And her teacher actually tailored exercises for her hand size.
Yeah, like a doctor, she said. Prescribing specific stretches because, well, she wished she had a broader hand spread. She had quite small hands.
So how does she manage with those limitations?
Adaptation. She changed her finger curvature, her pedaling. It all depended on the specific piano's action, the sound she wanted, the hall's acoustics.
Instinct and imagination.
Totally. Using musical imagination, especially with pedaling and phrasing, to get the sound she heard in her head, regardless of physical constraints.
Artistically, she didn't like being pigeonholed either.
No, definitely a free spirit, as she put it. Loved composers right up to Prokofiev. But she had a sort of skepticism about so-called new music.
What was her take?
She felt humanity in music had maybe gone a bit crazy, that there needed to be a complete return to sensibility. Strong view.
And she resisted comparisons to past masters like Liszt.
Absolutely. Argued it's impossible because everything has changed. Pianos, tastes, what's even possible technically, societal customs.
So for her, what was real technique?
Not just hitting the notes fast. It was the sound, the interpretation, tone, the musical line, phrasing, accents, the whole musical conception.
Mechanical skill alone.
"We'll do nothing for you," she said. Her ideas came from within. Play for love, not for comparison.
It's such a fascinating picture, this blend of fierce determination from childhood, this almost accidental career, combined with deep practicality and an internal compass for the music itself.
Yeah, her story really shows you, doesn't it? That deep love, adaptability, focusing on the musical substance. They can carve out an incredible path, even without ticking all the usual boxes like competitions. Misha Dichter. We're pulling directly from his words, his recollections.
Yeah, it's great getting this unfiltered perspective. It really lets you understand the mindset of someone who, well, hit significant success pretty young.
Right. And his start is kind of surprising, isn't it? He just decides at 15, I'm going to be a concert pianist.
Completely against what his parents wanted. Apparently, they hoped he'd be a doctor.
And the moment he decided, boom, straight into intense practice, like up to 12 hours a day.
It's incredible. And for a whole year, he says, just pure fundamentals. Scales, arpeggios, trills, no formal exercises, just raw technique building.
That focus is something else. He also mentions key teachers, Ob Surko in California.
A former Schnabel pupil, yeah. And then later, Madame Rosina Levine at Juilliard. He started there when he was 18.
And underpinning all that early effort was what he calls a blind belief in himself. Like he didn't even fully get what the career entailed yet, but he just believed.
That kind of youthful confidence, maybe a bit naive, but clearly powerful, it must have fueled him. And, you know, by 34, he'd reached a level of success that's pretty rare at that age.
Which he puts down to a mix of things: destiny, he says, luck, and obviously a ton of hard work.
And he has this really candid, maybe provocative take on career timing for instrumentalists.
Oh, yeah, that part. He basically says, if nothing significant has happened by age 30, well, it probably won't happen.
Oof. It's a harsh reality check from inside that world, I guess. Shows how important that early momentum can be.
So jumping ahead to him as an established artist, his practice habits have shifted. It's less intense now.
Yeah, about 4 hours a day when he's traveling, maybe 6 in the summer if he's learning new pieces.
He also mentions being interested in the conducting bug, he calls it.
Right, partly because he thinks there are too many bad conductors out there. But he says he doesn't really have the time for it now. Maybe something for the future.
And composition. Not so much anymore, just writing cadenzas for Mozart concertos.
But what seems to have really grabbed him now is chamber music. He sounds really energized by it.
Yeah, he was working on Schubert, Brahms, Mozart, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff right before the interview. Calls it a new life.
It's interesting, that shift, and it connects to his thoughts on teaching, too. He does some master classes, like at Aspen.
But he's not a huge fan of the format, right? Takes a dim view, finds them confusing, sometimes an ego trip for the teacher.
Exactly. He'd rather do private lessons down the line with really talented students. He wants to pass on techniques he's developed.
Especially his memorization techniques.
Oh, yeah. This system he's got, it sounds incredibly detailed. Breaking down the form, structure.
But also memorizing intervals, harmonic blocks.
And getting a visual image with the hand, linking it all together on the keyboard. It's quite involved.
And he insists it's not about talent, it's a learnable skill. Says it lets him memorize fast if he has to, though maybe with a terrific headache.
Yeah, I bet. And he connects this to a problem he sees in students getting lost in the technical weeds.
Seeing the leaves without the trees is how he puts it, missing the overall architecture.
Yeah. He stresses thinking orchestrally at the piano, creating different textures and colors.
And his own technique. Low wrists, curved fingers, things he was taught, now just second nature. Plus using arm weight from the shoulder for power.
Though he mentions making small adjustments recently, like slightly lower wrists, flatter fingers, influenced by listening to his recordings, always refining.
It really shows the human side, too. He acknowledges feeling down. Incompetent sometimes says it's normal for artists.
And his way of dealing with feeling bad while playing is fascinating. He slows his thinking right down.
Like, way down, until he feels his hand physically connected to the music again.
And that whole memorization system, he developed it partly because of pre-concert nerves and memory fears.
So on stage, instead of fear, he focuses on the structure, the musical lines, trying to stay mentally just ahead of where he's playing.
3 or 4 seconds ahead, yeah. Attitude is key, he says. Build confidence. Look forward to playing.
He talks about conductors, too, positive relationships, like with Giulini, learning from older ones, enjoying arguments with contemporaries if it leads to a good performance.
And fellow pianists. Generally supportive, he finds. Avoids jealous types, critics, just idiot reviewers. He and his wife are genuinely happy for others' successes.
When looking back, if he had to pick one composer, it's Schumann. He sees him as a 20th century man ahead of his time.
Interesting choice. But he prefers living now in the recording age, because you can listen back, criticize yourself, learn from mistakes.
And study others, which wasn't possible before. But he's not optimistic about classical music audiences in the U.S.
Yeah, sees recital series declining, symphony attendance often more a social event than real musical passion.
Still, he keeps coming back to chamber music as this exciting new life for him personally.
And on leaving a legacy, he feels lucky just doing the work now. Happy he's rediscovered recording.
He sees recordings as, well, the only thing performers leave, but just reminders, snapshots of specific days.
Right. He doesn't think performers leave legacies like composers do. And whether strangers remember him or not doesn't seem to bother him.
It's such an honest look, isn't it? The sheer work, the mindset, the technical details, how his perspective has shifted over time.
Absolutely. From that blind belief early on to these very specific mental and physical systems, and then these candid thoughts on what it all means in the end. Rudolf Firkušný. The start is pretty fascinating. No musical family background, none at all.
Right. Just a piano in the house. He was, 3? And he just started exploring it himself.
Self-taught initially, then some formal lessons with a Mr. Kolosh. But the real game changer seems to be this encounter with Leo Janáček.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. He was only 5 years old.
5? How did that even happen?
Well, apparently a local bookstore owner heard him play, was impressed, and actually arranged for him to meet Janáček.
Wow. Meeting a famous composer at 5 must have been intimidating.
You'd think. Firkušný talks about Janáček testing him, perfect pitch checks, even identifying chords while facing the wall. Just listening.
So Janáček saw the talent straight away.
Clearly, he took him under his wing, but not for piano lessons, interestingly. For theory and composition.
And the teaching itself sounds unique.
Very. Super spontaneous. Sometimes playing duets, sometimes sight-reading Janáček's own opera scores. Imagine a little kid reading Katia Kabonova.
That's incredible.
But the core thing, the really insightful part, was Janáček making him bring original compositions. Every single lesson.
So focusing on the why behind the music, not just the notes.
Exactly. The structure, the creative thought. And crucially, Janáček treated him like a young adult, not some performing doll.
Right. He actively discouraged the whole child prodigy thing.
Absolutely. Forbade tours, insisted on normal school, believed you needed that broader education, that childhood. It shaped Firkušný profoundly.
So he follows that path, goes to conservatory later, as Janáček advised, and success came pretty quickly in Europe.
It did. Czechoslovakia first, then big debuts in Vienna, Berlin, Paris, while still in his late teens, acclaimed debuts.
And then came a big decision point, an offer from major management.
Yeah, a really tempting one, apparently. But his teachers, including John Kick's influence, advised him to wait, to keep studying.
Prioritizing depth over fame, that says a lot.
It really does. Then things got complicated. That 1938 U.S. tour didn't go so well.
Right, he mentioned a personal crisis, but also choosing the wrong kind of program, thinking Americans just wanted flashy stuff.
Yeah, a bit of misstep. A learning experience, though, which turned out to be important because then history intervened.
The German occupation of Czechoslovakia.
Forced him to leave in '39. He made his way through wartime Europe, eventually got to the U.S., but felt like he was basically starting from scratch there after the earlier tour.
Must have been incredibly difficult, but he managed it.
He did. A successful New York re-debut in '41, then a huge tour of South America in '43 really boosted his U.S. career, landing him gigs with major orchestras.
And through all this, he kept learning, right? Not just practicing, but reading, going to operas.
Yes, broadening his horizons constantly. He felt it was essential for real depth in his interpretations. Which brings us to his ideas about music itself, like his definition of technique.
Ah, yes, that was interesting. Not just speed, he said.
Not at all. For him, technique was control, touch, phrasing, pedaling, everything needed for a whisper-soft Mozart note, just as much as for, a thunderous Liszt passage.
It's a means to an end. Substance matters more than just brilliance.
Precisely. A really key insight. He's also quite honest about the tough side of being an artist.
The travel fatigue, the nerves.
Yeah, preferring trains over planes just to have recovery time. And the stage fright, he said, it could actually get worse with more experience, more responsibility.
So how did he cope?
His approach was to focus entirely on the music. Try to block out the audience, treat every single concert like it was the first time. Keep it fresh.
To make the music truly live, as he put it, which explains why he preferred live concerts to recordings.
Exactly. He felt recordings could be technically perfect, but miss that vital spark, that unique life the artist brings in that specific moment.
And dealing with critics.
He was his own harshest critic. That was his main focus. Otherwise, be philosophical, learn from fair criticism, ignore the unfair stuff.
Makes sense. And his teaching at Juilliard later on.
Focused on interpretation for advanced students, helping them find their own voice, not imposing one method.
Valuing individuality.
Very much so. It all ties back to his core belief. The music itself must always be the main thing. He told a story about his teacher, Suk, feeling inadequate before Mozart.
Right. The ultimate judgment is about being true to the art in performance, recordings, and passing it on through teaching.
He did worry a bit, though, that the modern emphasis on technical perfection might overshadow the actual meaning and substance of the music.
So Rudolf Firkušny's journey, it's really one of just unwavering dedication to the music's core, navigating challenges with this holistic view of artistry, always trying to breathe new life into it.
A powerful perspective, definitely. The source, well, it wastes no time telling us that pretty much everything about Gould is, let's just say, unconventional.
That's putting it mildly. Yeah. So our mission here is really to dive into this chapter and unpack what made him so unique, just based on what's written here.
Okay, let's do it. I mean, just his career path alone, it was so short, really.
Extremely short in terms of public concerts. The text says he was basically self-taught after 19.
After his mother and Alberto Guerrero, yeah. And the public concerts, only about 8 years of touring?
That's it.
Yeah.
U.S. from 55, Europe 56. And then he just stops. Retires from the stage in 1964. He was only 32.
32. It's amazing. And apparently, even as a teenager, he decided concerts were, what was the quote, just a little bit degrading.
And essentially distasteful. He saw them, initially anyway, as just a practical way to make some money, nothing more.
And he didn't feel that connection with the audience that many performers talk about.
No, quite the opposite, according to this. He felt having an audience there made him tend to show off.
Ah, right, which he felt interfered with the music itself.
Exactly. which is why he didn't allow anyone in the recording studio when he was working, no spectators.
But here's the really core point, maybe. His biggest objections weren't even musical, they were primarily moral.
Yes. He had this strong belief that music should be listened to in private, for contemplation, not like a communal thing, which he actually called group therapy.
That is quite a stance. And it contrasts so starkly with his love for the recording studio.
Oh, absolutely. He apparently felt comfortable in the studio from his early teens.
Yeah.
Always preferred it.
He got into the whole electronic experience early on, realized he could shape the sound after the performance.
Right, like the example in the text about fixing the bass on a Mozart recording from 1950. That kind of post-performance control was key for him.
He even said he fell in love with microphones, called them friends.
Yeah, it sounds like he saw them as collaborators, almost. Recording became everything after he stopped concerts. He saw it as timeless, not tied to a specific moment or place like a live show.
Where you can't just say take two.
Precisely, and he was deeply involved in the editing, choosing all the takes, the inserts, meticulous control.
Which he felt he lost in concerts. He even said live performing led to bad interpretative habits.
Like adding un-Bachian affectations, things Bach probably wouldn't have intended, like big dynamic swings or pauses, just to make an impact in a huge hall.
The book mentions a contrast between two Bach partita recordings because of this.
Yes, a 1957 recording made while touring, which the source calls maybe a bit glib compared to an earlier non-commercial one that felt more integrated.
Because the studio allowed for a sound pickup closer to listening at home, that one-to-one aspect.
Exactly, but his work wasn't just piano, was it? He branched out.
Right. Into radio production in Canada in the mid-60s.
Creating these really experimental documentaries, the idea of North is mentioned, and the Solitude trilogy.
And they weren't straightforward narratives. He used contrapuntal texture, multiple voices speaking at once.
Yeah, structured almost like music and drama hybrids, really pushing boundaries.
It sounds like music was just one part of his creative output. The text says less than half his working life was strictly music, and he barely practiced.
Apparently so. He was writing articles, too, on all sorts of things. Even pop singers like Barbra Streisand, he admired her phrasing, her italicizations.
Though not rock music. Found that simple-minded.
Offensive, even. Yeah. And he liked being a guest DJ, wanted to read the news. His interests were broad.
Okay, so let's touch on the famous eccentricities. The gloves.
Ah, the glove myth. The chapter explains it was usually about practicality. Cold playback booths, or that one time an unheated concert hall in Jerusalem. Not just a random quirk.
And the chair. The really low chair.
It's a broken chair myth, which, well, wasn't really a myth. He used the same chair from 1953 for everything. Concerts, recordings, practice.
Because he sat super low, like 14 inches, and hated benches with any give.
Exactly. He believed sitting lower gave him more control. Again, it comes back to control. It wasn't just oddness for its own sake. It served his purpose.
His musical tastes were also very specific.
Definitely. Strong preference for contrapuntal music.
Yeah.
Admitted a big blind spot for a lot of the 18th and 19th centuries. Chopin, Schumann, even Mozart he disliked for lack of counterpoint. And Stravinsky cannot bear him.
Wow. But he was drawn to Schoenberg.
Yes, interestingly. Partly because his teachers didn't like Schoenberg, maybe, but he admired the contrapuntal thinking, especially in the early works. He admired Schoenberg sort of despite the 12-tone system itself.
He also didn't like the competitive feel of concertos.
No, he wanted integration. The text mentions his recording of the Emperor Concerto with Stokowski as an example of trying to achieve that unified structure. For him, tempo wasn't fixed. It served the concept.
He even thought about how tempo preferences might change over time.
Yeah, an audience tolerance for long pieces, always thinking structurally, historically.
And finally, the book mentions his thoughts on A Year After.
A brief mention, yes. He apparently had a strong intuition that there is one, found purely here and now philosophies repellent. Oblivion seemed less plausible to him. Vladimir Horowitz. The music is behind the notes, not under them. What's he getting at there?
Well, it's quite profound, isn't it? He's saying, look, the notes on the page, that's just the start. Like anyone can hit the keys in the right order.
Like a typewriter, he says.
Exactly. But that's not music. The real music, the spirit of it, comes when the performer understands what's behind all that. The composer's intention, the history, the feeling.
Ah, okay. So it takes intellect. Study?
Definitely. Deep study. And then you have to actually do something with it. He says the worst thing is not to do anything, even if it's something you end up not liking. You have to commit.
Commit. And he mentions risk, too, right? Taking chances.
He does. He talks about taking risks in performance. Sometimes they land, sometimes maybe they don't. But for him, it's about finding that correct spirit.
So it's not about playing it safe. It's about keeping it alive. Spontaneous.
Absolutely. He felt a piece should never sound exactly the same way twice. That interpretation has to be living, breathing.
Okay, but what about technique? The famous Horowitz sound. And yet he claims he has no phenomenal technique. How does that square?
It is surprising, isn't it? But I think he means technique isn't just, playing scales super fast. He found scales boring, actually.
So what is technique for him?
It's about sound. The ability to create, like, countless shades of volume, of color between loud and soft.
Yeah.
Variety. That's his technique.
Yeah.
Making the piano truly sing.
Sing. Yeah, the piano is percussive, fundamentally. How do you make it sing?
He points to the pedal, the damper pedal, using it often, creating this subtle overlap, this resonance.
Ah, a kind of halo of sound.
Sort of, yeah. A singing quality you can't quite get on other instruments. It's a specific tool for that bigger goal. Beautiful, varied sound, not just accuracy.
And for someone listening, maybe a pianist trying to learn, what's his big piece of advice?
Oh, it's very clear. Never to imitate. He even quotes a proverb, don't follow the master's footsteps. Seek what he sought.
Seek the source, not the result.
Right. Imitation, he says, it's just a caricature. You have to find your own approach. Technically, musically. Your own voice. He tells that story about sleeping with Wagner under his pillow.
Instead of practicing Bach, and his teacher just said,
Let him do what he wants. Let him find his own path.
Which seems fitting because his career path wasn't exactly standard either, with that long sabbatical.
No, it wasn't. He stopped touring around 53. He was just exhausted. All those concerts, 50, 60 a year, and the travel, especially trains, he really disliked it.
So he planned a year off.
Yeah, and it just stretched. Became 12 years. He actually enjoyed the piece, playing just for himself, recording.
But he did come back. Why?
Well, he said he got tired of only playing in the studio, realized time was marching on, and when he came back, things were different.
How so?
He insisted on afternoon concerts. He felt city audiences were more alert then, less tired from the day. He found some kind of magic in that afternoon energy.
Interesting. And fewer orchestras, too?
Mostly recitals, yeah. He preferred the total control, the freedom. It all ties back, doesn't it? That need for personal spirit, control, authenticity.
It really does. From behind the notes to his career choices, even how he talks about his piano needing care, like a person.
Right, like it has its own spirit that needs looking after. It's all connected.
Byron Janis.
The book paints quite a picture, doesn't it?
It really does. You get this sense of like relaxed artistry. There's an animal rug, big sofa.
Mineral specimens, too, which apparently he and his wife collected.
Yeah, though they didn't like being called collectors. And of course, the huge bookcase and the 2 grand pianos.
A Steinway and a Baldwin.
Mm-hmm. And it mentions his wife, Maria, Gary Cooper's daughter. She's a painter herself.
Right, so a very creative household. So our goal here is basically to unpack this conversation, figure out the key things about Janis's journey from this text.
Yeah, how did he become the artist we know? And wow, it starts young.
Like ridiculously young, 5 years old.
5. And not even through lessons initially. It was a Christmas gift, a xylophone.
And his kindergarten teacher playing piano.
Right. He heard her play a tune, went to his xylophone, and just played it by ear.
Amazing. Then did the same on the piano at home. The teacher pinned a note on him.
Yeah, pinned it right to his suspender. Caused quite a stir, apparently, and that led to his first teacher back in Pittsburgh, Abraham Leteau.
Leteau, now he sounds interesting. Used letters instead of notes.
Totally unusual method. Janis apparently still has music he can't properly read because of it.
Wow.
But effective, it seems. Also strict. The source mentions him, hitting Janis's hand or wrist sometimes.
Oof. So unconventional but demanding.
Definitely. And it worked fast. He was playing Bach solfeggiato after just 6 months.
6 months. Incredible.
So Leteau eventually said, okay, you need more. He recommended Joseph and Rosina Levin.
The famous husband and wife team. So off to New York.
Yep, big move. But studying with both Levins was, well, confusing at first.
How so?
They had different musical opinions. Imagine getting conflicting advice from 2 legends. It rattled him.
I bet.
But there's that great story about Mr. Levin crawling on all fours or purring to explain a musical mood.
Seriously?
Yeah. So maybe the insight there, amidst the confusion, was that music isn't just one single right way.
That's a huge lesson early on. He didn't stay exclusively with them long, though, right? There was Dorothy Anderson La Follette.
Briefly, yeah. But then Adele Marcus came into the picture. She was key.
Okay, Adele Marcus. From age 10 to 16.
She really built his technical foundation. But importantly, she encouraged his own expression. Never forced the specific style on him.
That seems crucial.
And around the same time, age 10, he meets Samuel Chotsanov-Chotsy.
Ah, Chotsy. He sounds like more than just a teacher.
Oh, much more. A real mentor, kind of a father figure. He'd been a pianist, a major music critic, bigwig at NBC.
He persuaded Toscanini to come to the U.S., didn't he?
That's the one. Chotsanov sorted out financial help for Janis, connected him with people like the Heifetz family through marriage. It shows how important that wider support network is.
Absolutely. Which leads us to, well, the really big one, Horowitz.
The Horowitz meeting. Age 16, Janis plays the Rachmaninoff second in Pittsburgh.
And the conductor was Loren Maisel, who was only 15.
Can you imagine? So Horowitz hears him, his first comment. Just good.
Understated.
Very. But then came the invitation to New York. So at 17, Janis starts studying with him. Apparently, Horowitz's first official pupil.
And Horowitz had conditions. Big ones.
The main one, don't play for any other artists or teachers, period.
Why was that? Just possessiveness?
Horowitz's reasoning, according to the text, was about finding your own voice. He felt listening to too many others too early would just confuse Janis, make him exaggerate or second-guess himself. Avoid imitation at all costs.
Protect the unique spark.
Exactly. Horowitz wouldn't even play for Janis in lessons. He'd travel with him on tour, teach him there, always pushing Janis to find the sound inside himself.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And you can see how that shaped Janis's own ideas about teaching.
Totally. He rarely demonstrates himself. He thinks it just leads to mimicry. Talent needs careful guidance, sure, but not just being shown what to do.
And his view of the piano itself.
Fascinating. He calls it extraordinary, capable of anything, but fundamentally it's percussion.
You have to make it sing.
Precisely. He talks about its orchestral potential, uses Mussorgsky's pictures as an example, needing oils, not watercolors, to get that depth. It's about seeing beyond the mechanics.
And he's deeply passionate about romanticism.
Very. Argues all great music comes from the heart, the soul, regardless of the period. He felt the whole anti-romantic thing was a reaction to excesses, playing just from the head.
He felt the pendulum was swinging back.
Yeah, back towards acknowledging that emotional core. He quotes Chopin, play with all your soul, all your soul. That's central for him.
Beyond the piano, his interests seem pretty wide-ranging, too.
Oh, yeah. Fascinated by 19th century Paris, feels a deep connection to Chopin reading his letters, trying to understand the man.
Didn't he meet Chopin's? No, George Sand's granddaughter.
Yes. Aurora Lothsand, at Nohant, played for her on this little locked piano. Incredible moment described in the text.
Wow.
And it mentions Maria's painting career, her parapsychology research, how they maintain separate lives but are still as one. He finds music everywhere, apparently, and really regrets that we've sort of lost the art of improvisation.
So it all feeds back into the music.
It seems so.
Uh-huh.
His whole life experience informs his playing. Lili Kraus.
Yes, an absolutely incredible figure. And the chapter, it really throws you right in, doesn't it? Meeting her, Madame Kraus, in her New York hotel suite.
It does. You get this immediate sense of her presence. The description mentions, her appearance, striking eyes, but also this real warmth.
Exactly, a kind of effervescent charm. The scene starts so normally. Sandwiches, coffee, even ice cream, before you get into the heavy stuff.
Right, that contrast is key. And that's really our focus for this deep dive, isn't it? How this overwhelming experience she had being imprisoned.
Yeah.
How it didn't just derail her life temporarily, but actually fundamentally reshaped her entire outlook on life, on her music.
Absolutely. The text makes it really clear she saw those years in prison as the source of, well, the deepest changes within her.
Changes
like this profound compassion, but also, paradoxically perhaps, this incredibly intense, almost immediate gratitude for, the simple richness of life itself.
that idea of immediate appreciation, I found that really striking. The source mentions her finding wonder in things we just take for granted. A clean cup. You said sandwiches earlier?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just a passing phase, was it? This immense gratitude, this enthusiasm, it became like the absolute core of how she lived afterward.
Absolutely. And not just live personally.
Yeah.
It apparently permeated everything, her performances, her teaching, her whole philosophy of being an artist.
She saw interpreting composers as a kind of sacred trust, right?
A sacred privilege, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially you imagine after years where playing was just impossible, taken away completely.
Yeah, 4 years. It says 1942 to 1945, no piano, not even sing sheet music. And the chapter traces how she ended up there. It started during a concert tour.
That's right, in Jakarta, which was Java then, under Japanese occupation.
Yeah.
They were essentially trapped.
And going back wasn't an option either, because of her husband.
Exactly. Her husband was part Jewish, so after the Anschluss, Germany annexing Austria, going back there was impossible. Plus, they'd already lost everything in Italy before that.
Wow. Expelled, possessions gone, pianos home, just stripped bare.
Yeah. So they were trying to get to New Zealand, apparently. But this tour commitment in the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia now, put them right in the path of the war. Something about her friendship with the wife of the Dutch Governor General. Just an excuse, really.
And she was sent to this place that the source calls the Inferno.
Uh-huh. The secret police's underground cells. Constant screams, just unimaginable conditions.
It's hard to even picture. Her husband tried to intervene.
He did. Tried to take her place, argued she was just an artist, a mother, not political. But they arrested him too. They did let him see her cell briefly.
And that's when she sang, to show she was okay.
Yes. Hundreds of Hungarian songs, apparently. Just kept singing, even when they told her to stop, threatened her.
Incredible resilience. She figured they wouldn't physically harm her because of her international profile.
Sort of. She thought they might hesitate to do it publicly, fearing the backlash. But the mental anguish, that was immense. Missing her family, of course, but maybe even more. She missed her music.
The source says the desire to play nearly drove her mad.
Uh-huh. So she came up with this, extraordinary coping mechanism, complete musical recall.
Just playing it all in her head.
Exactly. Conjuring up entire pieces, the technique, the sound projection, everything. Silently, internally.
That's astonishing. She worked at it until the scores and the feeling of playing became incredibly vivid inside her mind.
Yes. And she felt she could actually perform pieces she hadn't physically touched in years, finding new things in them through this purely mental practice.
Wow. And then, after all that, there was that moment with the piano and another camp.
Yeah, piano brought in for Christmas, a moment of just unbelievable reprieve.
Finding a crystal spring in the desert, she called it.
Beautifully put. No scores, just playing from memory, from the heart. All that accumulated pain and joy pouring out. For hours. She described it as this almost miraculous access to everything she'd ever known musically.
Merciful madness. What a phrase.
It really captures it, doesn't it? And that experience, it just solidified her belief that artistry isn't just about training. It's something innate, a gift you're born with.
Her faith, her love for the music, her identification with it, that was her lifeline.
It allowed her to live in the music, even completely cut off from any instrument.
And out of all that suffering, this intense inner musical life, she developed this really profound vision for the future, didn't she? about music replacing words.
Yeah, it's quite something that humanity would eventually evolve to a point where music becomes the main way we communicate.
Not just sung language, but music itself existing internally.
Shared between people directly. So directly wouldn't even need actual sound. You just know the music inside someone else.
Song without words and then song without sound. So looking back at this chapter on Lili Kraus, we've traced her journey into imprisonment, the awful challenges she faced, but also these really surprising ways it shaped her.
Forging that deep gratitude, that almost fierce enthusiasm for life and art that came to define her.
It really underscores that idea of resilience, doesn't it? And how suffering can be transformative when met with that kind of deep connection to something bigger. For her, it was music.
Definitely. A powerful takeaway. Rosalyn Tureck. The chapter opens with the interviewer visiting her Manhattan apartment. And it sounds incredible.
Yeah, it does. Books everywhere, apparently. Not just music, but philosophy, science, art.
Right, and actual art. Antique instruments, too. Gives you a sense of this really broad intellect.
Definitely. And then Tureck herself described in a green silk robe, piercing eyes, strong laugh, very expressive facially, a real presence.
Her childhood seems, well, steeped in music. Sisters practicing, her mother singing constantly, loudly.
Loud enough for the whole neighborhood, the text says. And it clearly soaked in. At 4, she just starts playing the piano.
Using both hands, finding melodies, harmonies, just like that.
Yeah, instinctively. No reading music at first. Just hearing it, feeling it, improvising. Apparently she kicked the piano baseboard out of frustration so much it was full of dents by age 9.
Wow, that passion was there early.
Yeah.
But that raw talent needed guidance.
For sure. Her first teacher, well, let's just say the story about confusing tenuto with the number 10 tells you a lot.
Right. Not quite the foundation she needed. But the second teacher, Sophia Brilliant Liven. Now that was different.
Oh, completely. Around age 10, Brilliant Liven had been Anton Rubinstein's assistant. Tureck calls this the real start of her studies.
And she sounds intense, severe, focused on technique, that Russian school emphasis on a singing tone, meticulous detail.
Exactly. Then came Jan Chiappusso, her third major teacher, a concert pianist himself, but also a Bach scholar, deeply educated.
And he immediately saw her affinity for Bach, didn't he? Told her she should specialize.
Yeah, he was amazed. Offered her a full scholarship, 2 lessons a week, recognized something special there.
Okay, let's talk about contests. They seemed really important in her development, revealing her individuality.
Definitely. That Chicago tournament when she was 13, like 80,000 kids involved.
Huge. And this moment in the semifinals, playing late at night, told no applause.
Right. But the key thing she remembered wasn't the applause she got anyway, which was intense, but changing the piano bench beforehand.
Because it was too low. Just a simple practical thing.
But she realized later it was her first, public act of individuality. Unconscious, she thought. She believed real artistry had to come from that subconscious level.
That's fascinating. And the biggest praise wasn't winning the contest.
No, it was after that semifinal. Brilliant Liven, who almost never gave compliments, told her she played like Anton Rubinstein.
Wow. After 4 years of study with her, that was the only compliment.
Apparently so. Winning the actual contest finals, the money and contract, she said, felt like an anticlimax after that comparison.
Incredible. Later, though, contests weren't always validating. The Naumburg.
Oh yeah, at Juilliard. She played an all-back program and lost. And the reason the judges gave...
Nobody can make a career in Bach.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable.
Tells you how far ahead of her time she was, or at least how entrenched the thinking was.
But then she enters another big one. The Schubert Memorial and National Federation double contest.
Her teacher pushed her, and she wins it. Age 20, varied repertoire this time, and boom, major manager, Carnegie Hall debut. Her career takes off unexpectedly.
So the world caught up, or maybe the varied program made the difference then. She learned performing needed more than just skill, right? That psychological element.
Yeah, that charge. And her goal wasn't just beauty, but giving the listener, a new sense of life, a profound aim.
Okay, the back insight. This feels absolutely central to her story. Around 1617.
Yes, working intensely on the A minor prelude and fugue from Book 1. She describes this moment of losing consciousness briefly.
And when she came to?
A completely new understanding. Deep insight into Bach's structure, the musical psychology, the form. It just hit her.
And this wasn't just an idea. It demanded action.
Exactly. She realized this new understanding required a totally new technique at the piano to express it.
Which became her famous technique. Each finger completely independent.
Right. Capable of different touch, different volume, different tonal quality, all simultaneously.
To actually voice Bach's interwoven lines, the counterpoint, on a modern piano?
Precisely. She pushed back hard against using standard romantic piano technique for Bach, and she used scholarship to back it up, pointing to evidence Bach knew early pianos, like the Silbermans.
So it wasn't just her way. She felt the music itself dictated this approach.
I do what Bach tells me to do. That was her line. The structure demanded it. She even noted other creative geniuses had similar breakthrough moments after intense focus.
Which leads perfectly into her identity as more than just a performer. She was a scholar from very early on.
From 14. Studying ornamentation, antique instruments, historical performance practices, lifelong dedication.
She cherished being called a scholar and an artist, and the unique liaison of the two.
Yeah, that really resonated with her. Her legacy isn't just the playing or the Bach style, it's the scholarship, the teaching, that integration of disciplines.
But her interests went way beyond music, too. Philosophy, science, art, even snorkeling.
A truly curious mind. The chapter also touches briefly on her personal life, being widowed, but finding deep connection with her stepchildren, calling them her children.
And she reflected on being a woman in music.
Yeah, acknowledging the historical prejudice. Critics saying she played like a man, as if it were a compliment back then, but also seeing more freedom in her time compared to earlier generations.
Her view of the contemporary era was interesting, admiring the achievements, but seeing ugliness too.
Very. Predicting a kind of dark age before a rebirth centuries from now. She said she'd rather visit Bach in the past than the near future, but maybe 850 years ahead. That sparked her interest. Andreé Watts.
It paints quite a picture, even off stage.
It really does. He casual clothes, likes his tea, but also this giant Havana cigar, which is quite an image.
Huh, yeah. And it mentions his voice, this resonant baritone, and how he speaks.
Articulate, but also uses slang quite a bit. It's an interesting mix.
And you get this visual of him thinking, his brow furrowing.
Yeah, deep in thought. But then the contrast when he hits the stage.
Oh, totally. Explosive is the word used, like lightning hitting tinder.
And they immediately compare it to Liszt, that kind of almost theatrical power. It really sets the scene for his performance style.
So, moving on to success. Watts has a really interesting take. He doesn't boil it down to one thing.
Not at all. For him, it's a combination. He lists talent, desire, push, luck, and chance. Quite a few ingredients there.
And he makes a point of separating luck and chance. That's interesting.
It is. Luck for him is external, being in the right place at the right time.
Like that huge moment replacing Glenn Gould with Bernstein.
Exactly. He calls that pure luck, something that just happened. And it's kind of amazing he apparently just saw it as fun and exciting at the time.
Not potentially career-ending if it went badly.
Right. Just youthful excitement, I guess.
So what's chance then, if it's not luck?
Chance, for Watts, is internal. It's about indefinable qualities you're born with, personality traits.
Ah, okay. So things in his own nature that just made him suited for this high-pressure life.
That's how he sees it, less about timing, more about innate stuff.
Which kind of leads into the whole push thing with young players, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And he gives what he calls a qualified yes to the idea of pushing kids.
Qualified how?
Well, he's very blunt. He says he wouldn't be a pianist if his mother hadn't made him practice, even when he didn't want to.
But he's not advocating for, like, locking kids in rooms.
No, definitely not. He mentions that story, an artist supposedly locked up to practice calls it the wrong way, even if the artist became famous.
So it was more about guidance.
Exactly. Parental guidance to keep the interest going if the talent's there, to avoid regret later on. It's about nurturing, not brute force.
Makes sense. Okay, shifting gears to performing, that old debate. Play for the audience or for the music or yourself, like Rubinstein versus Schnabel.
Watts just kind of dismisses that division. He thinks you owe your best to all three, the audience, yourself, and the music. No barrier.
And he tells that story about Schnabel.
Right. About Schnabel seemingly enjoying it when people walked out of his Chopin preludes. Watts found that baffling.
Yeah, like it was a badge of honor that people didn't get it.
Exactly. Watts sort of asks, if the music is boring, it must be great music. He just rejects that attitude completely. The goal is interpretation and connection.
What about dealing with the industry?
Yeah.
Critics, conductors.
With critics, his wish is simple. Just add a line saying, this is just one person's opinion.
Fair enough. And conductors.
He finds it tough if they're unsure or, well, not very talented. He says there's nowhere to go musically. But he also values good collaboration. He remembers a young conductor having this really very special idea for the Tchaikovsky concerto dynamics.
And what about other pianists? The book touches on ego.
Oh, yeah. That anecdote is pretty revealing. Being backstage, seeing famous pianists react with gritted teeth when someone else plays brilliantly. Watts just found that inability to appreciate someone else's success odd. A waste of good energy, he calls it. He contrasts it with Liszt's time, which he saw as more generous.
Interesting. Okay, what about nerves? Performance anxiety?
He's pretty open about it. Says it's almost always there, some level of it, but it's in me, not like a constant panic.
He had a rough patch with memory lapses, didn't he?
He did a whole season. He talks about how it became this self-feeding thing and how he just had to work through it himself. Ultimately, he says the artist has to figure it out alone.
That sounds tough.
Definitely.
And then there's that final kind of philosophical question a friend asked him.
Oh, right. Do musicians ever play differently, or is it just better or worse?
What did Watts think?
He calls it a ponderous thought. He kind of muses that maybe knowledge and skill grow, maturity develops, but the core, the basic thrust of the attitude toward music, maybe that stays the same.
Volume 2.
Right away, it brings up this big contrast, the way we see a concert pianist versus, well, the reality behind it all.
Yeah, that image on stage.
Yeah.
The preface uses Garrick Ohlsson's words, right? How you look terrific, totally in charge.
Performing something just incredible.
Exactly. And the audience loves it. He gets that, says it is incredible work.
But then there's the flip side, and the author uses Ohlsson to show that, too. He apparently says something like, I am quite good on my own.
And I'm a good loner, too. Yeah.
Which is quite a statement, isn't it, that contrast?
Totally. The glamour versus maybe the solitude.
Right.
And the preface says that idea, the humanity, the person behind the performer, that's the heart of this book.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how Mach frames it. She's very clear this isn't like a how-to book for pianists.
Not about practice tips or theory.
No. The preface says, if you pick up some technical insight, great. But that's sort of a bonus. It's not the main goal.
Okay, so if it's not the technical stuff, why focus so much on the humanity? What's the payoff there, according to the preface?
Well, it seems to be about understanding them as, well, people. People dealing with everyday stuff, just like the rest of us.
Right.
But maybe dealing with it differently because of their unique career demands. Like that need for solitude Ohlsson brought up.
That makes sense. Not every job requires you to be okay, even good, at being alone for hours and hours.
Exactly. It's a specific pressure they have to navigate. And apparently the interviews really reflect this focus on the person.
How so?
The preface explains that the author didn't really push the conversations in any one direction. She let artists like Badura-Skoda, Bolet, Fleisher, Gilels,
So huge names there.
huge names. She let them talk freely about, their work, their feelings about it, hopes, dreams, whatever came up.
So it's their authentic voice coming through.
That seems to be the idea. And the preface argues that matters when we listen to them play. Because pianists interpret, right? They aren't just executing notes.
They're filtering composers like Liszt, Brahms, Chopin, Mozart, all those mentioned.
Schumann, Rachmaninoff, yeah. They filter that music through their own sort of worldview, their life experiences.
The preface calls them pilgrims on earth like the rest of mankind. So their journey affects the music.
Precisely. Knowing who they are helps us understand why their Brahms might sound different from someone else's. It connects the performance back to the person.
So it's about getting past just the formal wear and the, jaw-dropping skill.
Yeah, seeing the individual. Even that Rubinstein quote at the start about wanting to pay the elevator guy to listen.
Yeah, I remember that.
It just gives you this flash of personality, right? This intense need to connect through music, even alongside maybe needing that solitude sometimes. It's complex.
Paul Badura-Skoda.
Right. And the author sets the scene, doesn't he? Breakfast at the Pulitzer Hotel in Amsterdam.
Yeah, during a piano festival. And you immediately get this picture of Badura-Skoda as, well, more than just a name on a record sleeve.
Definitely. Not just the concert pianist persona. There's a lot more going on there, a complex figure.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets really interesting. These other interests he had.
Yeah, his avocations. You wouldn't necessarily expect them.
Not at all. Like skiing, mountain climbing, and chess.
Yeah.
Apparently, he even got a draw against Anatoly Karpov once.
Wow, Karpov. That's serious. And maybe the most revealing thing, he used to be a piano tuner.
A quondam piano tuner, as the book puts it, meaning he used to do it.
And he still maintains, 12 antique pianos himself? At his home in the Vienna woods?
12. That's incredible. That hands-on knowledge,
Yeah.
It must have informed his playing.
Oh, for sure. Like that story about him playing 5 different pianos in public in one day.
Yes. And adjusting almost instantly. He compared it to switching from lifting weights to, throwing table tennis balls.
Such different physical demands, but he just adapts. It really shows a deep connection, doesn't it, to the instrument itself?
It really does. And this physical, mechanical understanding, it seems tied into his whole philosophy about music.
Which he got from his teacher, Edwin Fischer, right? That music is an experience of life.
Not just an expression of life, but the experience itself. That's a powerful idea.
It is, and he backs it up with these amazing anecdotes. Birds answering his trills.
Or the ducks. Ducks gathering when he played Beethoven. He genuinely felt they were reacting to the music, to that life force in it.
Wild. And that comes through in his teaching, too, apparently.
Yeah, the author describes him listening like a surgeon, diagnosing what a student needs.
Using analogies like picturing elephants for big chords, it's about getting the feeling across, not just the notes.
Exactly. Helping them find richer fulfillment in life generally through the music, not just becoming technically perfect.
Which sort of explains his frustration with, the business side of things sometimes.
Right, like places that have a one-time only policy for performers, or just don't re-engage artists.
He saw that as really hindering growth, because pianists need that regular public exposure. It's crucial.
Competitions can launch you, sure, but it's the ongoing performance opportunities that really build a career, build that connection.
He felt the guaranteed concerts some competitions offered were actually more valuable than the prize money itself. That stage time is everything.
Okay, let's loop back to that hands-on knowledge, the piano mechanics.
It wasn't just a hobby, was it? It came out of necessity after the war, dealing with damaged pianos.
He even took a course at Steinway in Germany. And there's that story about the broken locker in Germany.
Oh, yeah, the one holding his tuning key. He couldn't fix this awful piano before a concert.
Knowing exactly what was wrong, but being unable to fix it, he said that was the absolute worst feeling.
You can imagine. And that mechanical insight also fed into how he thought about interpretation, especially pedaling.
Right. He learned from Fischer not to overdo it, no pedal pumping.
And he explained the history. Before foot pedals, there were knee levers that just lifted all the dampers.
Which helps you understand those weird Beethoven markings like senza sordino without dampers.
Exactly. In Beethoven's day, that often meant just lifting them and letting everything blend. Badura-Skoda talks about the start of the Waldstein's last movement.
Holding the pedal down for ages, creating that blurry, atmospheric sound. He called it the aurora effect.
Like mist, yeah. A deliberate blending of harmonies, very different from how we often think of pedaling now.
And this all ties into his core belief. Music has to mean something. There's no such thing as absolute music for him.
No, it's got content. He gives that really detailed reading of Mozart's Fantasy in C minor.
Analyzing its structure, the chromatic bass, the shifting keys, the kind of cyclic ideas, but really focusing on the emotion.
He hears a whole story. A death symbol at the start, then shock, anxiety, little flashes of memory.
And then a kind of defiance at the end.
Yeah.
He connects specific musical bits, size, certain chords, those chromatic notes like F sharp and A flat.
To Mozart's tragic language, like in the Masonic funeral music, he felt those specific notes added a sort of demonic quality.
It's all about conveying that specific meaning, which is why just playing the notes, for him, misses the whole point. It lacks the emotional core.
Yeah. And speaking of his own career, the LP record was a huge boost, wasn't it?
Definitely. Especially that Westminster recording of Schubert's Stroke Quintet. That really launched him internationally.
And even now, with all his activities, duo work, master classes, writing, finishing old scores.
He sees them almost as secondary, like hobbies, compared to the main act of solo performing.
It's funny, though, despite the skiing and climbing, he thought taxis were the biggest danger to a pianist's hands.
Huh. Priorities, right?
Yeah.
And he gives huge credit to his wife, Eva.
Also a writer and musicologist, they even wrote a book together on Mozart. She managed things so he could focus.
So, yeah, the picture you get from this chapter, he's not just a pianist. He's a thinker, a craftsman, a historian, someone deeply immersed in music on every level. Jorge Bolet, a true individualist.
Yeah, and the interview setup itself is really evocative. The writer meets him at the New York Men's Athletic Club.
Oh, right.
Paints this picture, Bolet, tall, dressed very sharp, like a businessman almost.
Not necessarily what you'd picture for a concert pianist, maybe.
Perhaps not.
Yeah.
And these greenish-brown eyes that apparently just invited you to be frank.
And the setting, this dining room, looking out over the city, coffee and tea ordered, tape recorders ready for what, a 2-hour chat?
Exactly. Sets the scene. And the first impression, this was a man of the world. You got that sense of real self-esteem.
A gentleman, definitely, but also outgoing, ready to talk, which, is pretty striking when you think about it. Well, he was in his mid-70s then, and still doing, 90 or 95 concerts a year?
Incredible, isn't it? That level of dedication. He did mention, though, that he managed it by keeping tours shorter.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, just a few weeks here and there. He tried not to do recitals like 2 or 3 nights running, except that one time in London, apparently.
So pacing himself within that relentless schedule.
Yeah.
Smart.
It shows that dedication didn't mean, just burning himself out completely.
And that dedication, plus his very distinct style, led to some interesting things, like playing the soundtrack for that Liszt movie.
Oh, yeah, Song Without End. He called getting that gig a real plum.
He did. And apparently, Abram Chasins pushed for him over Van Cliburn.
Right, saying Bolet already had the repertoire, he has the style, he has everything needed for Liszt.
It was a Liszt E-flat concerto performance at Carnegie Hall that sealed the deal, wasn't it?
That's what the text says. But Bolet himself said it was a mixed blessing.
Okay.
Well, it brought fame, sure, but it also ticked some people off. The old attitude, if you do Hollywood stuff, maybe you're not a serious musician anymore.
Ah, that perception trap.
Yeah.
He ran into that early on.
Seems like it. And speaking of career twists and turns, that story about Koussevitzky.
Oh, man. That was something. He played for him in Havana.
Yeah, on a apparently terrible piano. He played some Haydn, pretty simple stuff.
But Koussevitzky was interested.
Definitely. Got really excited when Bolet mentioned he played the Prokofiev Second Concerto.
And Koussevitzky said, like, wish I'd known sooner. Could have had you at Tanglewood this summer.
Exactly. Then a cable arrives booked. Tanglewood, August 4th. It looks set.
Until disaster strikes. While Koussevitzky was away, the Boston Symphony management booked someone else.
Victor de Sabata, yeah, for that exact date. Basically canceled Bolet right out from under Koussevitzky.
Wow. Just like that?
It's just a brutal reminder, isn't it? How much things outside your control can affect a career.
Absolutely. And maybe thinking back on things like that, maybe that informed his views on competitions.
Could be. He really didn't hold back there. Called them dreadful, just dreadful.
He judged the Van Cliburn once,
Huh.
right? And said that was it for him, his swan song for judging.
Yeah. Hated the system. But, and this is the kicker.
He admitted you kind of need them now.
Right. A young artist today, he felt, needs that big win to get managers and orchestras interested. It's a total catch-22.
But here's what I found really interesting. He didn't think he could make it today through competitions.
No, he was very clear, said his style was too personal, too individual, it's too much me.
He figured he'd be knocked out in the first round because it wasn't the kind of playing that wins competitions.
Which is just fascinating given how many concerts he was playing. Audiences obviously loved what he did.
It really highlights that potential gap, doesn't it, between what maybe juries are looking for and what connects with the public.
Definitely. He also tackled that criticism about playing with, quote, flat fingers.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading that. He just brushed it off.
Pretty much. Said pianists like Hoffman played just like that. It wasn't wrong, it just produced a different sound than curved fingers.
A technical choice, not a flaw.
Exactly. He pointed out even Horowitz used flat fingers sometimes for certain sounds, then curved for clarity in, say, Scarlatti. It's about the sonic palette.
Makes sense. He also mentioned his teacher, David Saperton, advising a very still posture.
Yeah, relaxed, minimal movement. Bolet agreed, pointing to Rachmaninoff as an example of stillness at the keyboard.
Too much flailing around, he thought, just leads to mistakes or tension.
And his practice. That was quite unique, too. A lot of slow work, but often away from the piano.
Really? Working things out mentally.
That's what he claimed. Said he'd never solved a major mechanical or interpretive problem at the keyboard, only away from it. That internal work was key for him.
That's quite different from just drilling passages over and over.
Very different. He also had thoughts on contemporary playing styles he was hearing.
What were his concerns?
Sometimes too much focus on inner voices, you know, the lines underneath the melody, and a kind of fussiness.
Losing the main tune.
Losing the main melodic line. Yeah, and its direction where the phrase is actually going, its point of arrival. He really valued clarity and forward motion.
Interesting critique. Yet, despite these criticisms, he seemed pretty upbeat about classical music's future overall.
Surprisingly so, maybe. He saw young audiences growing, music schools thriving. He sort of dismissed the doomsday predictors.
Like people saying movies or TV would kill live concerts.
Exactly. He saw music as resilient.
Looking back at his own path, he described it as a very, very slow evolution.
Yeah, building success gradually. His main regret wasn't where he ended up, but just that it took until his 70s to feel truly comfortable career-wise.
And his legacy. What did he hope for?
He said he'd take it as a huge compliment if people saw him as the last of the old-fashioned pianists.
Linking himself back to those giants like Rachmaninoff, Hoffman.
Whose individuality he really admired. Especially Rachmaninoff. Hearing him made Bolet think, that is what I want to sound like.
Wow. So Bolet's story, this whole deep dive into his interview, it's really about individuality, isn't it?
Absolutely. Building a career on his own terms, despite setbacks, despite systems like competitions that maybe didn't favor his specific style.
And the fact that audiences loved him while competitions might not have. It really makes you question if fitting the mold is the only way.
It certainly does. It poses that question for you listening now, right? In whatever you do.
Yeah. What does it mean to stick to your own nature, your own style, even when, you know, the established path seems to point another way?
Is the goal conformity or cultivating something unique, something that might take longer but feel more authentic, lasting, maybe?
Something definitely worth thinking about.
Youri Egorov.
Right. And the text sets the scene so well, doesn't it? Puts us right there in his Amsterdam home.
It really does. On a canal, cheerful place, describes it as typically Dutch, narrow, white house. But then inside, kind of cheechy, contemporary art everywhere.
And the Steinway, up on the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
You get this image of him, relaxed, but, well, tired too. Just finished concerts, late night.
Yeah, you feel the weariness, but it gives you that immediate human connection. And one of the first things that jumps out is how his playing, specifically Scarlatti, changed after he moved to Holland.
Ah, right. Because he started hearing original instruments there.
Precisely. And that shifted his perspective away from the more romantic style he'd learned in the Russian school. He mentions his teachers, Irina Dubinia and Jacob Zach.
And that romantic approach, the text even notes, the edition of Bach they used, Modellini, actually advised using lots of pedal.
Yeah, which really underlines that tradition he came from. But then his take on those period instruments he heard later.
He found them a bit dry, didn't he? Like lacking soul.
That's the word. For him, the modern piano was what made the music, well, come alive. It ties into his whole view of the artist's job, you know?
Rendering the composer's intent, seeing them as poets, like Brahms, Beethoven, extremely careful with every marking.
Exactly. You have to decode that poetry.
And speaking of the physical side, the text touches on his concert prep. It's quite detailed.
It is. Psychologically, he starts about a week before, just imagining the whole concert. He felt that really helped with nerves later on.
Makes sense. And physically.
Physically, it was about practicing slowly, but crucially, keeping the exact same movements as when playing fast. And also practicing very quietly, pianissimo.
Why pianissimo?
He said it demanded more concentration, refined his tone, especially for those tricky, rapid, repeated notes. Real discipline there.
Definitely. And memorization. He wasn't about forcing it, right?
No, not at all. He felt it just came naturally with playing the piece over and over. Said he really disliked being rushed to memorize something quickly.
It sounds like he was pretty open about the less glamorous side, too.
Yeah.
Nerves, mistakes.
Oh, remarkably so. He talks about a memory slip during a Schumann piece, points to the really difficult jumps in it, and wonders if maybe it was fatigue or even like a touch of self-complacency setting in.
That's quite honest.
Yeah, and he calls going back to correct a mistake a dangerous practice. It shows the mental tightrope they walk. And the physical side, too, he mentions playing 2 concerts in one day was just, well, too much.
It really brings home the human element, that unpredictability he mentions. Sometimes feeling great leads to mistakes. Feeling awful leads to a brilliant performance.
Right. He even quotes Arrau, saying it's like something written in the stars. You just don't always know.
Then there's a big shift in the interview, moving towards his life outside music, specifically leaving Russia.
Yeah, and he frames it very clearly around freedom, or the lack of it, not just, travel or books, but musically.
What couldn't they play?
Well, he gives the example of Sofia Gubaidulina. Her music was restricted because she wasn't in the official composers union. Imagine that. He does contrast it with people like Richter and Gilels, who seem to have more leeway somehow.
But the general atmosphere was restrictive.
Definitely. He paints a picture of fear, censorship, stemming from the post-revolution era.
So Amsterdam must have felt completely different.
Totally. He talks about appreciating the sort of honesty of the Dutch people, but above all, just the freedom to think, to speak.
And the text mentions he was very open about being homosexual.
Extremely open, found Amsterdam liberating compared to, say, some reactions in America. He tells this story comparing Texas to New York City, quite revealing. He also discusses the difficult climate around AIDS back then, morality debates, and the fact it used to be punishable in Russia. His view was simply, I was born that way.
The text also has him addressing drug rumors.
Yeah, he tackles that directly. Says he tried LSD and cocaine early on, found them terrible, actually led to depression. Not helpful at all. Dispels that myth pretty firmly.
It's interesting, too, that despite the solitary nature of piano practice, he needed people.
Very much so. Says he's not a solitary person, finds touring lonely. He even disliked eating alone, would get room service just to have the TV for company.
What about audiences? Did he notice differences?
Oh, yes. He found English audiences might love Scarlatti, but be wary of Debussy. Recalls an organizer actually asking him to change a program because of it.
Really? Wow.
Then German audiences, he felt, were very knowledgeable, and the Dutch, he found them the most open-minded.
He also touches on recordings, doesn't he?
Mm.
The pressure for perfection.
Right. With modern editing, there's this push for flawlessness, which he felt could sometimes get in the way of actual music making. He mentions pianists like Gieseking, who just record straight through, mistakes and all. It was about the performance.
And there's that funny story with the violinist, Emmy Verhey.
Ha, yes. Starting a concert, both pieces in A major, and his mind just blanked on which one came first, so they started playing two different pieces simultaneously. A perfect little snapshot of live performance reality.
So when it came down to it, what did he hope his legacy would be?
Simply to be remembered as a pianist with a good sound, but in a poetical way. Music was his communication, and he lists his big influences: Richter, Michelangelo, Gould, Horowitz, Rubinstein, Lipatti. Quite the list.
Definitely. The interview catches him in his 30s, kind of reflecting.
Yeah, looking back. Acknowledging his mother's influence, she pushed him towards piano. Apparently, he originally wanted to be a doctor. And also a shift in his beliefs, moving from atheism towards believing in some kind of supermind or creating force. Not organized religion, but something more.
It's a really rich portrait, covering so much ground: art, freedom, the personal journey.
It really is. You get this sense of the immense discipline needed, but also that acceptance of the unpredictable, that's something written in the stars.
Janina Fialkowska.
So let's dive in. Maybe start with her early days and that huge connection with Arthur Rubinstein.
Okay, so she started piano really young, age 5, flew through her degrees, got them by 17. But the huge moment, the real breakthrough, that was 1974.
The first international Arthur Rubinstein competition.
Precisely. She won a top prize, and Rubinstein himself was actually on the jury. Imagine that.
Wow. And he was blown away, wasn't he? Instantly. Became her mentor, advisor, friend even.
He really was. His praise was just extraordinary. He said something like he'd never heard any pianist play with the power, the temperament, the understanding, the beauty of tone, and the emotion and technical command she had. Just amazing.
That's incredible praise, and critics agreed.
Oh, yeah. They echoed its strength, technique, tone, temperament. Saw her as a, quote, complete romantic artist. But, you know, the book really gets into the nuts and bolts of the life itself, what it's actually like.
Right, beyond the stage lights, like the interviews she mentions.
Yeah, she talks about them being necessary, obviously, but exhausting. She apparently told the interviewer about doing 7 in one day, and by the last one, she was just making stuff up.
Huh, I can picture that. And the mental side, memorizing music, dealing with nerves. She's very upfront about memory slips. Says they happen to everyone who plays seriously.
Totally. Calls anyone who denies being scared basically a liar, or relating fables was her phrase. She talks about the horrors of your mind just going blank.
That split-second recovery needed.
Exactly. And that story about her Chicago Symphony debut in '85 really hits home.
Yeah.
Playing Mozart, waiting for the orchestra, and then just, bam, a black sheet feeling.
Yeah.
Complete blankness. Wanted to run.
Oh, God, that's the nightmare scenario.
It is. But she said she just remembered all the years of work, trusted her fingers somehow, played the whole thing terrified. And it was a success.
Incredible.
And she finds it, you know, humanizing when even legends like Rubinstein sometimes had to stop an orchestra. I think shows the pressure.
Definitely. And then there's the sheer physical side, the touring fatigue.
Right. She calls it her boring life on tour. But it's about survival, isn't it? 9 hours sleep, eating sensibly, walking, lying down before concerts, mentally reviewing.
And absolutely no flying on the day of a concert. A strict rule.
It's relentless. Which brings us to a tricky point she raises, why maybe fewer women pianists sustain those huge international careers late into life compared to men.
Yeah, what are her thoughts on that?
Well, she suggests it's tough to mesh that kind of career with wanting a, quote, normal life or family. And maybe, she feels, women are more sensitive to the really fierce competition early on.
Interesting perspective.
And she does offer her slightly controversial view, maybe, that women are not that strong physically in comparison, fatigue more easily. She talks about consciously working on her arm strength for the big pieces, feeling like some male colleagues didn't need to in the same way. It's her experience, you know?
A very direct take, for sure. And speaking of repertoire, she's also quite frank about pieces she plays, like, say, Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto.
Oh, yeah. She admits she doesn't, love practicing it, finds extraneous notes, thinks some melodies are a bit shallow under the microscope.
But she plays it anyway.
Because audiences adore it.
Oh.
And she says it's brilliantly written for the piano, and crucially, it just works on stage. Those same melodies suddenly feel touching in performance.
That's a really interesting performer's insight. Now, being Rubinstein's protege, that wasn't always easy either, was it? After his active support faded.
No, it got difficult. Especially, she mentions, in London. Tabloid rumors wrongly linking her to his marriage troubles. Shut down her career there for about 3 years. And apparently, her manager was falsely using Rubinstein's name to get her bookings. It forced her, really, to learn to stand on her own 2 feet.
Learned to do so much for myself, she says.
And that period involves some serious personal struggle, too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doubt, depression.
Yeah. A couple of years after her first tour, career issues, losing Rubinstein's active presence, it all hit hard. Anxiety, physical symptoms, couldn't get out of bed, started canceling concerts, which Rubinstein hated.
So how did she get through that?
She got professional help, took medication, though that made playing hard, being sedated. The turning point sounds almost simple. A London recital she felt she couldn't play, called her manager in despair.
Yeah.
And his response was just incredibly calm. Something like, let me just get my bread out of the oven and then we'll talk.
Just that little bit of normality seems like it grounded her. She says she hasn't canceled a concert since that day.
Amazing. So what did she actually learn from Rubinstein, musically speaking, since he wasn't a formal teacher?
He showed her how music should sound. Things like projection, getting the sound to the back row without just banging, the importance of a beautiful, singing tone, color, using your imagination.
He could play things loads of different ways, apparently.
Yeah, like 15 or 16 ways. And structure, a sense of pulse, not rigid time, but that feeling of forward motion.
A deeper musicality. She contrasts his confidence with, well, less confident behavior in others.
Yes, she contrasts Rubinstein's genuine self-assurance with the insecurity she sees in some great musicians who maybe treat staff badly. She links it to insecurity, maybe upbringing.
And when did she feel she truly was a concert pianist?
Around age 30, she reckons. Says it takes maturity to play composers like Schubert well, even the seemingly simple stuff. At 35, when this interview happened, she felt like she was just at the beginning.
Because she knew herself better.
Yeah, knew herself, her limits, felt battle tough, ready to actually enjoy it. Said she could cope if she lost the ability to play, but she'd fight for her career while healthy, no longer afraid to speak up.
That's real growth. And looking ahead then?
She wanted better balance. Fewer concerts, maybe 60 a year, better travel planning, valuing smaller concerts too, and finding a sanctuary. She bought a house in Connecticut, didn't like Manhattan, enjoying home life.
Finding that grounding seems key.
Definitely. Her core belief really sums it up. Everyone has some talent, big or small, and you have to fulfill it. Hers is playing the piano.
Her story really gives you such a human look at what it takes. Dedication, resilience.
Absolutely. We've really seen the demanding reality behind any perceived glamour, haven't we?
Yeah.
The physical effort, the mental battles, career politics, personal crises, and finally finding her own balance.
Yeah, her path shows that facing fear, learning to rely on yourself, figuring out what success means to you, those are things everyone faces in tough pursuits, not just music.
True. It's universal in a way. Fleisher.
He takes us right back to the start. A pretty intense childhood. His parents, Russian father, Polish mother, came over to the U.S.
Right.
And his mother, he calls her a powerful personality, not much formal education, but she basically decided he'd be president or a great pianist.
Huh. And he thought pianist was the easier path back then.
That's what he said. He felt she made the right choice. It's funny, he can't even remember a time before playing piano. Started super young, like 4.5.
Wow. And it wasn't even meant for him initially. It was for his brother.
Yeah, but he just sort of soaked it up, listened to his brother's lessons, figured things out himself. He really took to it.
He mentions his mother's influence, though, calls it a heavy hand. You get the sense he missed playing outside, being a regular kid.
Definitely. It was all music, a very different kind of upbringing. He was even a kindergarten dropout, did tutoring instead.
Which, okay, gave him tons of time for music, but he also felt he missed out on, like, the social stuff you get in school. Had to learn that later.
By 8, though, he's already performing publicly, even with those WPA orchestra.
Oh, yeah, the government-funded ones during the Depression. That's pretty remarkable for an 8-year-old.
And then this story with Schnabel. 2 big conductors at the time, Hertz and Monteau, thought he had to study with Arthur Schnabel.
But Schnabel famously didn't take kids under 16, right?
Exactly. So they cooked up this plan, basically ambushed Schnabel at a dinner party, got 8-year-old Leon to play Liszt and Beethoven just as dinner was ending.
Wow. Nerve-wracking.
You'd think. But Schnabel listened, this total gentleman, and invited him to study. Fleisher ended up spending 10 years with him.
10 years. And he described that time as incredible, staggering, even chemical. What did he mean by chemical?
Yeah, that word jumps out, doesn't it? He meant Schnabel's teaching style was unique. He'd apparently pour everything about a piece into one massive lesson, like 3.5 hours on just a few bars.
Cool.
And he rarely repeated himself. So students felt this huge download of information, this like internal shift. It wasn't just learning notes, it was this intense discovery.
And you can see how that directly influenced his own teaching later at Peabody Conservatory starting in '59. He loved it, saw it as continuing Schnabel's work.
He actually viewed teaching as a step beyond performing, a bigger responsibility, passing things on.
And not just churning out concert pianists. For him, it was always about the music itself, first and foremost.
Totally. He looked for gifted students, but gifted meant commitment, immersion, being able to share their excitement. He really disliked that idea of learning technique first, then adding music later.
Music had to be the core, right? Not an ad.
Exactly. And his teaching style became really flexible, no single rigid method. And then, of course, his hand issue forced him to adapt even more.
Right, that's such a huge part of his story. Started gradually, mid-60s, overwork, strain, affecting the extensor muscles.
Yeah, the ones that straighten the fingers, like a severe writer's cramp, he said. Really difficult, kind of mysterious even then.
He admitted he didn't cope well initially, fell into a deep funk for, what, a year and a half? 17 years of tests and therapies?
It's hard to imagine. But amazingly, some positive things came out of that awful time. He started conducting.
Which he found really stimulating, intellectually similar to teaching, he said. Diagnosing problems, finding solutions.
And he explored all that repertoire just for the left hand, which is substantial.
He did try a comeback with 2 hands after surgery in '81. Managed shorter stuff, encores.
Just using finger strength. But he realized it wasn't enough for the massive demands of a full concert career. So he kept focus on left-hand rep, conducting, and teaching.
What's really telling is his view on careers. He noticed students often saw him as a stepping stone, for their careers.
But his focus stayed purely on the music itself. He was quite blunt about how tough it is for young artists today, called it a nightmare, with so many musicians coming out of schools.
Yeah, a pretty bleak assessment. Yet he still believed that real, first-class gifts, they don't just vanish.
Right. He felt that genuine talent somehow finds some kind of musical life, even if the competition circuit isn't the answer anymore. He seemed a bit disillusioned with competitions.
So for him, performing, conducting, teaching, they were all ways to serve the main thing.
Ancillary, he called them, all serving the central passion. Music itself. His whole life had to connect to music, finding ways to stay involved despite everything.
The interviewer actually met with Emil Gilels.
Which was huge, because apparently he hadn't given an interview in something like 20 years.
That's right, 2 decades.
Yeah.
So this was a big deal. The book sets the scene. It's New York, cold November evening. The interviewer is heading to the Essex house.
You can almost feel the anticipation, maybe a bit of nervousness.
Definitely. And Gilels had some, let's say, interesting ground rules. no interpreter.
Even though he called his own English broken.
Yes, and crucially, no tape recorder. He didn't want that broken English on tape, so the interviewer, just shorthand to memory.
Wow. Talk about pressure. Now, Gilels himself, he was a landmark figure, wasn't he? The first major Soviet artist to perform in the U.S. since Prokofiev, way back in 1921.
He was. And there's that, maybe legendary quote from Arthur Rubinstein back in the 30s after hearing the young Gilels.
Oh, yeah. If he comes to America, I might as well pack my bags and go.
Whether it's true or not, it shows his impact. When the interviewer met him, he was short, stocky, but full of energy. Still had traces of that red hair Rubinstein mentioned.
And a huge grand piano right there in the suite.
A massive one. Gilels was dressed informally, holding his glasses. Apparently, any initial stiffness melted away once they started talking about music. He was determined to get his ideas across, maybe even because there wasn't a recorder making him self-conscious.
Though the interviewer did get a sense he kept things within certain bounds.
Yeah, it kind of steered away from, say, comparing the U.S. and Russia directly or getting too personal about life back home. Sometimes just change the subject.
Okay, so let's dig into his background. Music was there from the start, wasn't it? Introduced to piano at 4½.
Always a part of him, he said. Musical family. His sister sang. And he had these childhood fantasies. Imagining, conducting, even making sounds by touching the piano strings, not just the keys.
Pretending to be opera characters, that's quite vivid.
And this little detail, his favorite day, when the piano tuner came.
Ah, because the sound was so clean afterwards.
Exactly. He loved that pure, vibrant sound. Said he'd play for hours then, much longer than usual.
His first big teacher, Jacob Tengich, started with him at 5. Sounds like he was formidable.
Very. Strict, dictatorial, apparently never gave compliments. All about scales, studies, building that rock-solid technique. Tengich himself came from a strong line studied with a pupil of John Field, taught Anton Rubinstein.
Serious stuff. But then later in Moscow, he studied with Berta Ringwald. She sounds like the complete opposite.
Totally. Warm, human, treated him like a son. Interested in arts, literature. It made the work much more interesting, Gilels said. He considered those two, Tengich and Ringwald, his real musical parents, even though he studied with Neuhaus later, too.
Interesting, he didn't stick with teaching himself. He tried it.
Yeah, but couldn't stand the repetition involved. Felt he didn't have that specific gift for projecting ideas clearly that a good teacher needs. So he just focused on playing.
And his playing evolved. He saw his recordings starting way back in 1934 as a kind of map of that change.
Right. He even mentioned an old Rachmaninoff third recording. Technically fine, proper, he said, but not really alive compared to a later one that felt more inspired.
So for him, performance was about more than just hitting the notes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mastery first, yes. Detail, comfort with the piece. But then you add fantasy, imagination. You have to be caught by the spirit, be true to the composer, but also independent.
He still got nervous, though.
Always. Said he never found a cure, but quiet reflection, meditation helped a bit.
And his repertoire was quite wide, wasn't it? Not just a specialist.
No, he played what he enjoyed. Mozart, Brahms were mentioned. He actually avoided playing pieces too often. Maybe 3 times was enough sometimes.
To keep it fresh.
Yeah, keep perspective, find new things, or project old ideas differently. He saw composers as telling stories, and he wanted to explore all those stories.
Which brings us to that key point about live versus studio recordings. He strongly preferred live.
Very strongly. Live concerts had vitality, that connection with the audience providing inspiration. The studio, that required what he called a double imagination. You had to invent the audience in the spirit. Much harder.
He remembered those early studio sessions. No tape, play perfectly in a hot room.
With just a mic and a director staring at you. Not exactly inspiring freshness, is it? He talked about trying to capture the Polish Chopin by closing his eyes, imagining the scene, the people.
How did he feel he connected with composers then?
Through the music itself, their common language. He'd imagine the composer, their country, the sounds, the smells, speaking with them and about them through the performance.
What about critics? Did he pay attention?
He found it interesting, reading their impressions, comparing it to what he'd hoped to project. But he accepted he wasn't a machine, he'd have off nights.
He was very firm on not canceling concerts, too.
Absolutely. Believed you must play if you're scheduled, even if sick. Calling it off was a narcotic. Playing was the medicine.
Outside music, he sounds like quite an observer. Enjoyed travel.
Loved it. Said every country was like an interesting book, like the U.S., its history, observing nature, cities. But he also needed quiet.
The country house outside Moscow.
Yeah, for solitude. walking alone or with his dog, Max. He used to play tennis, volleyball, but stopped to protect his hands.
He achieved his dream, though, wished for less rush, but content, said if he came back, he'd do it all again, only better. Stephen Hough.
Right. And the setting for this interview, it's not your typical quiet room.
No, not at all. It actually started, believe it or not, with a police escort.
Yeah. Flooding at Ravinia Park near Chicago, they literally needed the police to get the interviewer out of the lot to meet Hough for lunch. Talk about making an entrance.
Seriously. So picture this. Rainy day, drama getting there, and then meeting this young Stephen Hough. He was only in his 20s then.
Described as having this very British way about him, friendly, but with a real intensity. Sensitive, too.
And apparently first things first, chocolate mousse cake. Before any deep talk could happen.
Priorities. You got to respect that. Okay, so diving into the conversation itself, Hough talks a lot about his early training. Gordon Green seems to have been a massive influence.
Yeah, Green sounds fascinating. The interview makes it clear he wasn't about quick fixes or just correcting mistakes constantly.
No, he was playing the long game, thinking about development over, 5 or 7 years, building musical understanding, self-awareness, trusting the student.
And Green had this specific way of teaching, didn't he? He wouldn't just play things for Hough.
Right. He worried about imitation. Instead, he'd use words, descriptions, try to evoke the sound or feeling. And famously, he'd tell Hough, think it.
Think it? Just mentally rehearse the phrase or passage first.
Exactly. Before even touching the piano. Get the concept clear in your head.
He also brought in recordings of the old masters.
Oh, yeah. People like Cortot, Paderewski. He'd point out specific things, tiny details in pedaling, or their use of rubato, that sort of expressive flexibility with time.
Not to copy them note for note, I gather.
No, more like holding them up as examples of what was possible, artistic ideals to, strive towards.
Which kind of leads into that amazing story about Beethoven's Opus 110. Hough was 13.
Yeah. He's playing this melody, thinking to himself, gosh, this is beautiful. And Green stops him, takes his pipe out of his mouth.
And says,
my dear boy, this piece is not beautiful. It's sublime.
Wow, that's quite a distinction. Beautiful versus sublime.
Exactly. Moving beyond just pretty sounds or human feeling into something deeper, almost transcendent. Haas said that lesson really stuck, a key moment.
So Green laid this kind of philosophical, long-term foundation, but later he studied with Derek Wyndham, who was different.
Very different, yeah. Wyndham was much more analytical about the physical side of things, technique.
Like finger positions, weight, how the brain tells the hand what to do.
Really detailed stuff. Haw credits Wyndham with helping him untangle some technical problems, adding this layer of precision on top of Green's broader approach.
Okay, so with all that training, how does he actually practice? The interview mentions some slightly unusual methods.
He gets creative, sometimes practices with his eyes closed.
Oh, interesting. To focus more on touch and sound, I guess.
That's the idea. Heighten the other senses. He also talks about messing with rhythms in difficult bits, like playing them in really exaggerated ways, or even transposing tricky passages into other keys.
Transposing? Why would he do that?
He found, especially with passages heavy on black keys, that moving them helped solidify them, boosted security, maybe even helped memory. It's about experimenting, finding inventive ways to tackle problems.
Right, not just mindless repetition. And what about performance itself? Dealing with nerves.
Nerves. He brings up a quote from Egon Petrie, who was actually Green's teacher. Petrie thought nerves often come from vanity.
Vanity, not just. Caring a lot.
Well, the idea is you're nervous about how you'll look, how you'll be judged, rather than focusing purely on serving the music. Howe feels you need this sort of crazy mixture of self-confidence and humility.
Confidence to get out there, humility to focus on the composer. Makes sense.
Yeah. But he's also really honest about the tough side of being a touring pianist. That phrase he uses.
The monk without benefits.
That's the one. It paints such a clear picture, doesn't it? The loneliness, hotel rooms, room service, missing people.
Yeah, he mentions how material comforts don't really make up for that lack of human connection when you're on the road constantly.
It's a solitary life much of the time. But then he balances that. He talks about the immense fulfillment he gets from connecting with the audience.
Like that story about the woman with multiple sclerosis.
Exactly. Who was so moved by his Rachmaninoff. That kind of thing, giving pleasure or comfort, that's what makes the difficult parts meaningful for him.
He also mentions taking retreats at
Yeah.
monasteries.
Cistercian monasteries, yeah. Doing simple work like making beds. He finds it therapeutic, a way to step back and see his talent almost as a gift he's meant to give back through performance. Puts things in perspective.
Looking ahead, or I guess at the time of the interview, looking at the current scene, he mentions pressures on pianists today.
Yeah, the need for a huge repertoire, learned fast. He worries it can sometimes make performances feel a bit less personal, maybe lose some of that individual romantic aesthetic, the unique timing and flair the older generation had.
He sees pianists as recreative artists, right? Interpreting, not just reproducing.
Precisely. Bringing the composer's work to life through their own understanding and personality.
And his own legacy, how does he think about that?
He's quite humble about it in the interview. Says he doesn't know how he'll be remembered, but he hopes his interpretations have a distinct stamp, a recognizable voice.
It's true. For performers, the recordings are often the main legacy, capturing that specific interpretation.
Exactly. Unlike the composer's score, which is fixed, the performance is ephemeral unless captured.
Zoltán Kocsis.
The interviewer describes him then at 34 as, young-looking, lanky, tousled hair. But that initial impression shifts pretty quickly to his playing. He's described as having this marvelous palette of colors, an introspective kind of pianist.
Introspective, I like that. It fits with how he could take pieces like Liszt's Ave Maria or the grossest concert solo.
Pieces that could just be technical fireworks.
Right, but he'd find this, beautiful sensitivity in them. It wasn't just about showing off.
I mean, maybe that connects to why he was sometimes seen as a mystery pianist.
Could be. That lower profile, certainly. He wasn't exactly chasing the limelight. Plus, doing so many different things, composing, conducting, chamber music.
Which meant fewer solo concerts, probably.
Yeah. And the source mentions he was even a bit hesitant in the interview at first, maybe suggesting people didn't really want to know about him.
Until he was reassured, apparently.
Right. So moving into his perspectives, one thing that really jumps out is how strongly he identified as a composer, not just a pianist.
Oh, definitely. He was really focused on orchestral works, wasn't he?
He was. And driven by this quite strong belief that orchestral music is, I quote, about to die.
Wow. So he saw his composing as a kind of rescue mission.
Sort of, yeah. Pushing back against what he felt were these debilitating constraints on composers.
What kind of constraints?
He talked about being forced to write short pieces, maybe 10, 15 minutes long, just so they'd fit before the main concerto in a concert program.
The programming straitjacket.
Exactly. He called that time limit horrible, unconscionable, a stylistic boundary that stopped him from being truly advanced in orchestral writing. It made it hard even to use improvisation if you needed strict bar counts.
And his piece, Chernobyl 86, is mentioned as an example.
Yeah, a really powerful one. He said the tragedy itself dictated the form, the style. Apparently, it caused a big scandal in Hungary at first.
Really? Why?
The source doesn't elaborate much on the scandal itself, just that it happened. But it did get premiered eventually, though he first heard it on the radio from Holland.
Huh. Strange way to hear your own premiere.
Isn't it? And despite being only 17 minutes, it used a full orchestra, even unusual instruments like a hurdy-gurdy and cymbalum.
Interesting instrumentation. He contrasted it with other works, didn't he?
Yes, like Penderecki's Hiroshima. Kocsis felt that piece had so little real music, too much sound effect. He wanted melody and dissonance part of life, he said.
Fascinating. Now, besides composing, he also taught piano for a good while.
He did, yeah, at the Liszt Music Academy in Budapest. taught everything from Bach right up to, like, Stockhausen and Cage.
But he stopped teaching eventually.
He did. Part of it was just the practical difficulty, teaching 6 hours a day and having a demanding concert career.
That sounds exhausting.
Totally. But there was another reason, maybe a bit more pointed.
Yeah.
He felt that the source of the great talents in pianism is exhausted in Hungary. And also a sense that maybe people today are just less sensitive to piano playing.
Wow. That's quite a sobering thought about musical training and maybe audience reception, too.
It really is. And thinking about his own training, spotted at 3, incredible memory. His first teacher really drilled technique into him.
Which he found difficult later on.
As a teenager, yeah. Apparently found it really hard, even wanted to quit piano twice. Once at 14, feeling his technique wasn't good enough, and again at 17, realizing his repertoire was too narrow despite his successes.
So what did he do?
He actually withdrew for 2 years. Just practiced. Absolutely. And his advice for young players reflects that. Master technique early, encounter loads of styles, because, as he put it, there's no real remedy later on.
That's strong advice. But interestingly, his professional practice habits were different. Right?
Yeah, quite different. As a touring artist, he felt practicing more than 4 hours a day could actually spoil your results. He favored shorter, really concentrated sessions.
Makes sense. Which brings us to someone who was clearly a huge influence,
Yeah.
Sviatoslav Richter.
Oh, yeah. The admiration just pours out of the text. He found Richter's playing so developing, so dimensionally rich, even more so than Paulini, who he called technically fantastic and perfect.
There's some great anecdotes in there, too. Meeting Richter in '74.
Getting invited to replace Paulini at a festival, apparently playing in a jumpsuit and unpolished shoes.
And playing Schubert forehand with him. That must have been something.
Imagine. And Kocsis defends Richter against the perception some had that he was mad.
Right. Kocsis saw him as a very nice man. The quirks like hating travel or that incident with the spectacles in Paris. Kocsis saw them as just odd ways of handling things, or maybe signs of intense focus.
Yeah, not madness. He even speculates about why Richter started using sheet music in concerts later on.
He thought it might be weakening memory, not just losing perfect pitch.
That was his guess. But ultimately, for Kocsis, Richter was just fantastic, incredible, exceptional.
A real musical hero for him.
Definitely. And connecting this back to the wider music world, Kocsis had some pretty strong views on commercialization.
Didn't he? He wasn't happy with the orchestras all sounding the same.
Exactly. He contrasted them with the Vienna Philharmonic, which he felt still had a distinct sound. He thought too many were just chasing big audiences, big sales.
Over true musical value.
Precisely, and that actually motivated him to found the Budapest Festival Orchestra to try and cultivate a unique sound.
And he linked this commercial pressure to a perceived lack of new, real talent as well.
He did. He felt the market favored the standard, the normal, the mediocre. He definitely saw himself outside that mainstream.
And rejecting the whole idea of superstardom, like Horowitz or Pogorelich.
Yeah, he felt that kind of fame was something real musicians shrug about. Which leads right into his core philosophy, really.
Which is?
He says, basically, if being a superstar mattered to him, he'd chase it. But it doesn't. What matters is the music.
Simple as that.
And crucially, serving music well is much more satisfying. He concludes pretty firmly that he does serve music well, and that's why he doesn't need superstardom.
So bringing this all together, we've sort of journeyed through Kocsis the pianist, the composer wrestling with constraints, the teacher, the student who struggled, his views on practice, that deep connection with Richter, and his real pushback against commercialism.
All flowing from that central idea of serving the music itself.
Garrick Ohlsson.
The book says he was picking out tunes at 3. Can you imagine?
Wow, 3 years old.
Then formal lessons at 8, and by 13, he was already at Juilliard on weekends. Pretty intense.
Definitely. And that led to early competition success, like the Busoni in Italy.
But the big one, the really standout moment, was winning the Chopin competition in Warsaw. 1970. He was the first American ever to do it.
And still the only one. Right. That's huge.
It really is. What does that kind of landmark win so early on tell you?
Well, it immediately put him on the map. I mean, especially as a Chopin interpreter. And the source confirms Chopin, along with Liszt and Rachmaninoff, became central to his recordings.
Yeah, his discography is extensive there.
And it basically kicked off this life of constant international touring. The text mentions nearly a dozen trips just to Poland.
And the interview itself, the setting described in the book, it wasn't some, stuffy formal thing.
No, it was a hotel coffee shop in Milwaukee, apparently.
Right. And he'd actually asked to delay it a bit because he wanted more rehearsal time for the Liszt E-flat concerto.
That little detail, prioritizing rehearsal, it says a lot about his work ethic, doesn't it?
It really does. And the description of him in casual clothes, trousers, striped shirt, sneakers, it kind of breaks down that imposing concert pianist image.
Yeah, it makes him seem more approachable. The text paints him as enthusiastic, good-natured, really down to earth.
And willing to go deep on a topic. I mean, the conversation lasted almost 4 hours.
That commitment to exploring things thoroughly, that probably reflected in his music too, I'd guess.
So digging into those 4 hours, what were the moments that really defined him? The book highlights one at 15.
Ah, yes, hearing Emil Gilels at Carnegie Hall. From the stage, just feet away.
He said it wasn't just hearing, it was feeling the performance, the power, the dynamic range, huge louds, incredibly soft, quiet moments, and the sheer concentration.
He actually calls it an epiphany. His age of reason, he said.
Right, like a moment where the immense seriousness, the absolute commitment needed just clicked for him, became totally real.
That's a powerful realization for a 15-year-old.
He also talks about teachers, Sasha Grudnitsky, who apparently saw his potential right away, and the book amusingly quotes Ohlsson saying Grudnitsky couldn't wait to get his claws into him.
Huh. And Irma Wolf, too, as an intensive coach.
But Claudio Arrau seems to have left a really deep mark. What was that influence about?
Ohlsson felt Arrau could just hear more than anyone. Not just the notes, but the nuance, the composer's intention, even the physical action needed for the sound.
So more than just technique.
Exactly. It was about connecting mind and body. Arrau stressed that unity, your physical movements, have to be completely tied to your musical thinking. That integration is key for expression and control.
Makes sense. And speaking of control and demanding work, how does someone like Ohlsson sustain that level, especially with all the travel?
Well, his approach to practice is interesting. It's not about endless hours. He emphasizes intense, focused work practicing with your head rather than just your rear end, as he puts it.
So quality over quantity.
Pretty much, usually 3 to 4 hours a day, but really concentrated.
And fascinatingly, he mentions that sometimes his deepest work actually happens on the road, finding that quiet, uninterrupted time away from distractions back home in New York.
Yeah, which gives you another glimpse into that touring life. It's tough, the disjointedness, keeping relationships going, sometimes literally waking up unsure which city you're in.
That must be disorienting.
For sure. But the text suggests he's adaptable, good at creating a temporary home base, and managing the practical side of things.
You'd have to be. And it seems like he needs outlets beyond the piano, too. The book touches on his other interests.
Definitely. He was planning a sabbatical, actually, to sort of reorganize things at home, reconnect with people, pursue hobbies.
Like what?
Well, he's a big reader. Psychology, history, novels, even science fiction on planes. And he collects wine, apparently quite seriously.
It keeps the mind active. And he seems pretty physical, too. Jogging, cycling. There's a mention of an 800-mile bike trip from New York to Montreal, plus tennis.
Yeah, balancing the mental and physical seems important to him. He's also dabbled in composition lessons, even a bit of conducting.
Not as career changes, though.
No, he sees it more as part of your general music education. Just broadening his understanding of how music works from different perspectives, which is pretty cool, that continuous learning drive.
That feeds into his views on contemporary music, which the book also covers.
Right. He seems to genuinely enjoy working with living composers, being able to ask them directly about their intentions.
That direct connection must be valuable.
Absolutely. And he advocates for integrating new music with older works in concerts, not just ghettoizing it into all new programs.
He has that analogy right about style being like a hairdo.
Yeah, that style comes last, building on the fundamental musical principles, harmony, rhythm, structure, which he compares to the trunk and branches of a tree. The core substance matters most.
He seems pretty realistic about the audience for classical music, too, calling it the 2%.
And acknowledging that new music often takes more effort from the listener. He doesn't shy away from that.
So thinking about the long game, how does he view his own legacy?
It seems he's not overly focused on personal fame, which is interesting. The Force suggests his hope is more about being remembered for championing the music of his own time, maybe premiering works that last.
And the impact of teaching.
Ah, yes. He considers influencing a student, really changing a life through sharing knowledge, to be a human contribution of the highest order. That's a profound thought about passing on the art form.
Definitely.
Cécile Ousset. It's written by Susie E. Mater.
And Mater really sets the scene, doesn't she? You feel like you're right there. Cold, blustery Chicago day, heading to Orchestra Hall.
Yeah, and then this description of Ousset on stage, very energetic and apparently quite striking in like French haute couture, long blonde hair.
A real presence.
Definitely. And then backstage, the impression is, well, vivacious, happy-natured, enjoying life is how it's put, even with, needing some help with English.
A thick French accent mentioned, yeah. And her husband's there too, quiet, supportive.
Right, Pierre Moreau. And there's an interpreter mentioned as well, though the location for the actual interview apparently changed a bit. Logistics.
So you get this picture, dynamic, joyful, obviously talented artist. But then the text brings up this central question.
Yeah, it's quite pointed. Why, despite her obvious talent and all this experience, does the author suggest Cécile Ousset had to, and this is the phrase used, struggle for recognition?
It seems like a contradiction, almost.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the text goes on to outline some, well, pretty significant challenges she faced, especially earlier on.
Like what were the main things holding her back, according to the text?
Well, a big one was management. Finding good, effective management early in her career seems to have been a real issue. She apparently felt she missed out on major opportunities until much later when a younger manager in England really helped internationalize things.
Ah, okay. Like specific examples.
Yeah, like replacing Martha Argerich at the Edinburgh Festival. That was a key moment facilitated by this later manager.
And you mentioned challenges. Were there, like, biases she ran into?
Oh, absolutely. And the text is quite explicit about it after she placed third at the first Van Cliburn competition.
A big deal.
Huge. But she sought management in New York and was apparently told things like, point blank, "You are a woman and you are very young."
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that. The text notes that at that time, young women pianists apparently received, quote, no consideration. They preferred older, established pianists.
Even though she was, what, in her early 20s? Not exactly ancient.
Exactly her point. But the industry saw it differently. And the text brings up this other difficult dimension for women pianists,
Which
the
is?
sort of peak childbearing years. Managers apparently hesitated, worried about women taking time off. Ousset herself observed, quite starkly, that a man's career could seemingly start any time, but for women, it felt like a narrower window.
That's tough. And she also had thoughts on competitions, right? Something about there being too many.
Yeah, kind of paradoxical. She felt that winning a competition today might not launch a career the way it once did, because there are just so many. Managers can't possibly keep track of them all, she believed.
Interesting perspective. But her own journey started super early, didn't it? The text talks about that.
Oh yeah, training from age 3. In Algeria, at the conservatory there.
3? Wow.
Then moving to Paris, age 9. And that's when she connected with her really pivotal teacher, Marcel Ciampi.
Ah, yes, Ciampi. He sounds incredibly important in her story. Taught her for free at first.
He did. Crucial figure. Taught her about performance sound, specifically a Russian technique he traced back through Anton Rubinstein.
Right, that focus on using weight from the shoulder for a big sound. She emphasizes that's more important than just hand size.
Exactly. And he pushed her, really pushed her, apparently to tears sometimes.
Sounds intense.
He definitely pushed boundaries. Had her playing things like Liszt's Mazeppa on the radio when she was just 11, and she won her Deuxième Prix at 13, Premier Prix at 14, really setting her up for serious study in the competition circuit.
The Long Thibaut competition, though, sounds like there was some drama, but she met Rubinstein.
Yeah, judging controversies mentioned. And while Arthur Rubinstein apparently offered help, she felt, without the right connections, the establishment, she couldn't really break into that specific Paris scene. Ciampi had warned her about needing connections.
So she looked further afield.
Seems like it. Joining Jeunesses Musicale is described as a wild experience, but it helped her musically and, crucially, make international contacts. Kept her focused on that lifelong goal, being a top concert pianist, something she'd worked for since she was a kid, practicing hours daily.
And throughout all this, her husband was supportive.
Yes, Pierre Moreau. An engineer, loved music, and the text says he really prioritized her career, often touring with her. 29 years together at the time of that interview.
Okay, and what about her music itself? The text mentions she plays that really demanding romantic stuff.
Right, like Rachmaninoff's Third, because it's in demand. But her preference, apparently Schumann and Chopin.
Interesting. And she touches on the physical challenges.
Yeah, pieces with big octaves, she notes, can be especially tough for women physically. It reinforces why that proper technique Ciampi taught, using weight, is so vital.
So despite this incredible history, dedication, early wins, the text suggests her big international recognition was quite recent.
That's the observation, yes. Really taking off maybe only in the 5 or 6 years before the interview was done. Her name was getting out there internationally, but she herself admits she was almost too busy, too immersed in the demanding schedule to fully register the change.
So thinking about this whole chapter, this deep dive into Cécile Ousset's experience, what's the big takeaway for you, the listener?
Well, I think it really shows that even someone with immense talent, that kind of lifelong, rigorous training, early successes, they can still face these huge, sometimes deeply unfair hurdles. Finding the right support, dealing with explicit bias based on age or gender.
It definitely gets you thinking. If a prize-winning pianist playing on 5 continents, tackling the hardest repertoire, still feels she had to struggle for recognition, what does that really tell us about how success and visibility work in classical music, or maybe, in any super competitive field?
We're looking closely at Murray Perahia's thoughts. His early life. Music was clearly important from the get-go.
Oh, absolutely. His father was a big influence, taking him to the Met, music always on the radio. Standard stuff for a musical household, maybe, but it clearly stuck.
And piano lessons started super early, age 4.
4. But then a really key moment happens when he's 6. He plays for Abram Chasins.
Okay.
And Chasins recommends Jeanette Ham. She becomes his main teacher for, over 10 years, and really formative relationship.
But then, at 17, he makes a pretty big decision. He stops formal lessons.
Yeah, and this wasn't like throwing in the towel. It was deliberate. He felt he needed to step away to develop his own musical judgment, his own sense of value, his own voice, as he puts it.
That sounds difficult. And brave, maybe?
Definitely difficult. He mentions it was painful, actually, and required this really intense study of harmony theory, trying to make the music make sense to him.
And that internal focus, it didn't always translate well initially.
Apparently not. He admits that early on, some critics found his playing, very cold.
Right. The search for authenticity isn't always immediately understood, I guess.
Exactly. But his vision was always broader than just the piano. He went on to study conducting and composition.
Why was that?
His goal, he says, was to be a complete musician, not just a pianist. Composition was actually his first love, something he still feels a bit frustrated about not pursuing more fully.
Though he does compose cadenzas for Mozart Concerti, right?
He does. And the conducting, that was mostly about diving deeper into scores, studying the repertoire from a different angle. It all feeds back into this idea of complete musicianship.
Okay, so this foundation is laid. How did the performance career actually take off?
The big catalyst was winning the Leeds competition in 1972. That really opened doors, brought a flood of engagements.
Before that.
He was teaching, playing chamber music, and he makes an interesting point how many really talented pianists who dream of a concert career actually end up staying in teaching. It's a tough path.
Does he like competitions then,
Yeah.
given Leeds was so important?
He says he doesn't find them pleasant, personally, but he sees them as, well, a necessary evil, maybe. A way for artists to get heard, to get those crucial engagements. And he appreciated that musicians were the judges.
That makes sense. Now, central to his philosophy seems to be this idea about playing pieces repeatedly in public.
Oh, absolutely core. He feels you simply don't know a piece deeply until you've lived with it through many performances. Each time is a discovery. The piece transforms. You get closer to its essence. That's what keeps him going.
Which ties into his concept of accuracy, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
not just hitting the notes for him.
Not at all. Accuracy for Perahia is about profound understanding, grasping the composer's intent, the moods, the emotions, the whole message,
So how does the performer achieve that?
through what he calls an emotional transformation. The performer has to genuinely feel and convey those emotions, but crucially, they must align with the composer's message, not just use the music as a vehicle for their own unrelated feelings.
Getting your own ego out of the way, essentially.
Precisely. He quotes Tovey. True accuracy lets you think of the music without thinking of yourself. Powerful idea.
And this respect for the composer, it shows in his connection to specific figures, like Brahms.
Even though he plays a lot of Mozart, he feels this special connection to Brahms. Calls him ethical, because Brahms had such deep respect for musical history, for tradition, but combined it with incredible originality.
That resonates with his belief about creativity itself, right?
Exactly. He believes creativity blossoms from a deep tradition that is a living tradition. It's why he stresses studying music history, seeing how the masters tackled problems. It's not about copying, it's about understanding the lineage.
How does he study? Does he give examples?
Yeah, he talks about immersing himself in literature about composers. With Schubert, for instance, he studies the lieder, the songs, to find clues for instrumental themes, connecting, say, a major sonata's slow movement to the song Pilgerwise.
Interesting. Using vocal music to unlock instrumental meaning. Does he use other techniques?
Sometimes visual imagery, thinking of water, maybe, for a barcarolle feeling to achieve a certain piece or flow.
Away from the piano, what's his life like?
He describes himself as quite private, values close friends, often other musicians who understand the unique world they live in.
And teaching. He does some master classes.
Limited ones. He finds students are often technically brilliant, but maybe less developed musically. So he focuses on structure, harmony, demonstrating a lot. He also mentions learning a vital attitude from playing for Rudolf Firkušný, this deep respect for the text. Total dedication.
One of the most striking things seems to be his attitude towards the idea of a career.
Oh, absolutely. He consciously avoids thinking in those terms, sees it as potentially destructive. The focus has to be internal, musical growth, authenticity, connecting with the music itself, not the external stuff.
The trivialities, as he might put it.
Right. He also reflects on how hard a classical career is compared to pop, and feels a sadness about the split between classical and popular or folk traditions, which historically were much closer. Think Mozart, Schubert, their music was part of everyday life.
So, while he admits luck plays a part,
His main focus is always internal, his own development as a musician.
Ivo Pogorelich. The interview itself, the setup for it, was pretty unusual, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was supposed to be in Chicago originally.
Right.
But it ended up taking, 10 months and bounced around between London, Paris, Vienna.
Before finally landing back in London, where he actually lives.
Exactly. In the Albert Court building, which is quite something.
It really is, just behind the Royal Albert Hall. Built way back in 1865.
And it even served as RAF Bomber Command Headquarters during World War II. Imagine that.
Wild history. And today, super expensive apartments, home to, oil magnates.
And Pogorelich, yeah, his place is described as, palatial?
Filled with Yugoslavian art? Is that Berber?
That's the one. And lots of gold embellishments. Everywhere, apparently.
Which must be a really stark contrast against the ebony grand piano.
Definitely. And then there's this detail about a huge Victorian dining table.
Oh yeah, the one with no chairs.
Exactly. Because they haven't found the right chairs aesthetically.
That tells you so much, doesn't it? About his particularity.
It really does. The source also describes him physically tall, over 6 feet.
Distinctive eyes, soft green apparently, and quite talkative when he does grant an interview.
Animated, too, uses his hands a lot, sometimes massaging a finger.
Ah, the tendonitis from overpracticing.
Right, and his conversation style is kind of free associative, lots of tangents.
Interesting. That free flow seems quite different from the discipline needed for touring.
Oh, completely. Especially after a really tough tour, like 16 concerts in 21 days. He has specific coping mechanisms.
Like using that kid's hydration mix, Rehydrat, for flights.
Yeah, and ergo capsules for sleep. Needs his 5 or 6 hours. Very controlled.
He mentions controlling eating, sleeping, breathing.
Yeah.
Even does yoga. It sounds incredibly demanding.
It is. And that intensity carries over into his concert programs, too. They're not easy.
No lightweight stuff.
Yeah.
He believes the audience wants something substantial, right? Something memorable.
Exactly. And his practice. Just as intense. He stays in the hall for hours after a concert.
Hours after performing.
Yeah. Practicing, listening. He says repetition helps him control his playing on different pianos in different halls.
But not standard exercises.
No, interestingly, he invents variations around the pieces themselves, constantly adjusting, trying to match the sound he hears in his head for that specific space.
Yeah.
It's all about the ear.
That intense focus must have developed over time. He started piano relatively late for a top performer, didn't he?
Amateur level in Belgrade at 7. Then the shock came in Moscow, age 11, seeing how far ahead others were.
And he dislikes the whole child prodigy label.
Hates it. Feels it's about money, and it actually stops artistic growth. He thinks you need a period, to contemplate, to grow, like enlists time.
So he consciously pulled back sometimes.
Yeah, reduce performances to allow for that maturing process.
Which kind of connects to that famous 1980 Chopin competition incident in Warsaw.
Ah, yes. The big controversy. He didn't win, but the fallout. He called it a blessing in disguise.
Because of the publicity. Martha Argerich quitting the jury in protest.
Exactly. The judging was seen as political, giving him zeros, but the critics mostly sided with him, even if the jury thought his interpretation was too far afield. It launched his career, ironically.
It's a recurring theme, almost. He mentioned a later controversy with the Der Spiegel article, too.
Right, linking him to high society, money. Again, negative attention fueling interest.
A core idea for him seems to be making the music truly yours, like that Tchaikovsky concerto story.
Oh, the one he hated initially? His wife pushed him. He locked himself away in Buenos Aires for 10 days.
11 hours a day, just hotel and all.
Until he found it. That turning point, a few bars, and suddenly the whole piece became his. He absolutely believes you can only play something well if it's yours.
Total personal belief in investment.
Which also explains his views on recording, I think.
He prefers complete takes, hates editing.
Calls it untrue recording. Thinks technology is ruining our product because pianists might rely on fixes instead of truly mastering the piece.
And he really dislikes live recordings.
Strongly. Says you can't serve two masters, the microphone and the live audience. They demand different things.
It's all about artistic authenticity for him.
Definitely. And that commitment to meaning goes beyond music. There's that anecdote about meeting Mother Teresa.
Right. In the Rome airport, during travel chaos.
He spoke to her in Serbian, told her he was a pianist who played charity concerts.
The poor, disaster victims, cancer patients, orphanages.
Yeah. He said he felt relieved telling her, like he'd done something more important than just working for silver and gold.
It really underscores his main message, doesn't it? If you believe in something and have faith in yourself, nothing can stop you.
Exactly. His goal isn't a massive repertoire list. It's doing less, but doing it unforgettably.
He even talks about compositions dying and being reborn within an artist. That's a really personal connection to the music.
It truly is.
What's so striking is that depth of commitment, isn't it? That willingness to be unconventional, the sheer belief that art demands everything you have, plus something unexpected.
Absolutely.
It definitely leaves you thinking in your own life, your own work, what could happen if you focused on doing less, but doing it with that kind of total belief and personal connection? Where might that lead you?
Thank you so much for listening. We hope this episode has given you meaningful insights and sparked your interest in the book we explored today. Just a reminder, this is only a brief summary and not a substitute for the full reading experience. We encourage you to read the original book to truly appreciate its depth. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future episodes. And if you'd like to support our channel, feel free to share this video with friends. Every share helps our community grow.